Rain hammered Seoul's neon streets as Nyla Mercer crashed through the doors of an elite private restaurant hidden above the Han River. Designer heels dangled from one hand, mascara streaking down her face, while three armed men in gray suits stormed in behind her. They belonged to Victor Zhao, the billionaire trafficker her father had sold her to for gambling debts. Desperate and cornered, she spotted one empty chair beside a man whose presence silenced the room. Tailored black suit, scar along his jaw, eyes like winter steel. Without thinking, she sat down, grabbed his hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry I'm late, husband." The room froze. The man turned slowly. Lucien Kade, Seoul's most feared mafia boss. If you're hooked, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The chair scraped against marble as Nyla dropped into it, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her throat. Her fingers closed around the stranger's hand, calloused, cold, and completely still. She didn't look at his face. Couldn't. Not yet. Because the three men in gray suits had just pushed through the restaurant's entrance, scanning the room with the systematic precision of predators who'd already tasted blood. The restaurant itself was the kind of place that didn't advertise. Top floor of a glass tower overlooking the Han River, accessible only by private elevator with a key card that cost more than most people earned in a year. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across tables where Seoul's elite conducted business that would never appear in newspapers. The air smelled like expensive whiskey and secrets. Nyla's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. The hand beneath hers didn't move. She risked a glance sideways and immediately understood why the entire restaurant had gone silent when she'd grabbed this particular stranger. The man beside her wasn't just wealthy or powerful. He was something else entirely. Something that made instinct scream warnings in a language older than words. His face could have been carved from stone, sharp angles, a jaw that looked like it could take a punch and return it with interest, and a thin scar that ran from his left cheekbone down to the corner of his mouth. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, flat, and completely empty of anything resembling mercy. "Please," she whispered in Korean, her voice cracking. "Just for tonight, please." The man's gaze slid from her face to the three men near the entrance, then back to her. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise or confusion or anger, just that same cold assessment, like he was calculating the exact value of her life and finding it wanting. One of the gray-suited men started toward their table. Nyla's fingers tightened on the stranger's hand. Her nails dug into his palm. She could feel her pulse in her throat, behind her eyes, in her fingertips. Every cell in her body screaming "run," while her brain knew there was nowhere left to go. Then the stranger moved. His arm came around her shoulders in a gesture that looked almost casual, possessive. The kind of touch that said mine in a language everyone in this room understood. His hand settled against her bare shoulder, and his skin was fever hot despite the coldness in his eyes. "You're late," he said, his voice low and smooth and absolutely terrifying in its calmness. He spoke Korean with a slight accent she couldn't place. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." The gray-suited man stopped 3 feet from their table. He was built like a boxer, with scarred knuckles and a nose that had been broken more than once. "Excuse me," he said in Korean, then switched to English. "That woman, my wife," the stranger interrupted, his tone unchanged, not louder, not aggressive, just final. "Is there a problem?" The boxer's eyes darted between them, calculating. Behind him, his two companions had fanned out, blocking the nearest exits. Standard intimidation formation. Nyla had seen it before, in the weeks since her father had made his devil's bargain with Victor Zhao. "Mr. Zhao wants to speak with her," the boxer said carefully. "There's been a misunderstanding about—" "No misunderstanding." The stranger's hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for the glass of whiskey on the table in front of him. He took a sip, his movements unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Like three armed men weren't standing 6 feet away. "My wife and I are having dinner. You're interrupting." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nyla watched the boxer's face go pale. Actually pale, the color draining from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve. His hand moved toward his jacket, then froze. From the corner of her eye, Nyla saw why. At least 4 other men in the restaurant had stood up. They didn't draw weapons, didn't need to. The threat was in their posture, in the way they'd positioned themselves between the gray suits in every exit, in the absolute certainty that they would kill without hesitation. Perhaps, the stranger continued, still in that same terrifyingly calm voice, you should tell Mr. Zhao that Lucien Kade sends his regards. The boxer went rigid. Nyla felt ice flood her veins. Lucien Kade. She'd heard that name whispered in Seoul's expensive clubs, in the back rooms of legitimate businesses that laundered money for half of Asia's criminal underworld. Lucien Kade, who controlled shipping routes from Busan to Tokyo. Lucien Kade, who'd supposedly killed a Yakuza lieutenant with his bare hands during a negotiation gone wrong. Lucien San Kishi Kade, who didn't have a wife because he didn't have weaknesses. Until now. Until stupid, desperate Nyla Mercer had walked into this restaurant and grabbed his hand. The boxer backed away slowly. Professional. No sudden movements. His companions followed, and within 30 seconds they were gone, the restaurant doors swinging shut behind them. The silence that followed felt like the pause before a guillotine drops. Lucien's arm stayed around Nyla's shoulders. His thumb traced a small circle against her skin, a gesture that might have looked affectionate to anyone watching. But Nyla could feel the coiled tension in his body, like sitting next to a bomb that hadn't decided whether to explode. Don't move, he said quietly. There are 12 security cameras in this room. Everyone here saw you call me husband. Everyone here saw me claim you as my wife. His hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. Not painful, just firm. So now you're going to sit here. You're going to smile. You're going to lean against me like we've done this 1,000 times before. And you're going to pray that your desperation just solved a very expensive problem for me. Nyla's throat closed. I don't. The men at table 7, Lucien continued, his voice barely audible. Yakuza financiers from Osaka. They've been negotiating a shipping agreement with me for 6 weeks. The sticking point? They don't trust anyone without family, without roots. They think I'm too dangerous, too unpredictable because I have nothing to lose. His thumb traced another circle. But a man with a wife? A man who brings his woman to dinner with international partners? That's a man who can be reasoned with. A man who has something worth protecting. Understanding hit Nyla like cold water. I need them to believe you're real, Lucien said. I need them to see a marriage, not a transaction. And you, his fingers tightened again. You just gambled your life on a stranger because Victor Zhao's men were about to drag you out of here. So now we're both gambling. The question is whether we're smart enough to win. Nyla forced herself to breathe, to think. Her linguistics degree from UCLA hadn't prepared her for this. Her 3 years teaching English in Seoul hadn't prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for sitting beside a crime lord who'd just turned her panic into a business opportunity. What do you want me to do? She whispered. Exactly what you're doing now. Lucien lifted his whiskey glass again, and this time he brought it to her lips. Drink. Look at me like you've known me for years, and when I introduce you to the men at table 7, you're going to confirm every word I say. The whiskey burned down her throat. Good whiskey, the kind that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She set the glass down and forced herself to meet Lucien's eyes. Up close, they weren't completely empty. There was something there. Intelligence, yes. Calculation. But underneath that, just for a second, she saw recognition. Like he knew exactly what it felt like to be cornered, to be desperate, to make impossible choices because all the good options had already disappeared. My name's Nyla, she said quietly. Nyla Mercer. I don't care. Lucien's voice stayed flat. Tonight, you're Nyla Kade. You're 28 years old. We met 2 years ago at a gallery opening in Gangnam. You teach linguistics at a private institute. We've kept our marriage private because of my business interests. His eyes bored into hers. Can you remember that? Nyla nodded. Good. Lucien Mercer and stood, his movements fluid despite his size. He pulled her chair out, a gentleman's gesture that felt surreal given the circumstances. Now smile. We're going to walk over to table 7, and you're going to help me close a deal worth $40 million. Her legs felt like water when she stood. Lucien's hand found the small of her back, guiding her across the restaurant. Every eye in the room tracked their movement. Nyla could feel the weight of those stares, the recalculation happening behind expensive suits and designer dresses. Lucien Kade has a wife. Lucien Kade has something to lose. Lucien Kade is human after all. The three men at table 7 were older, silver-haired, wearing suits that probably cost more than a car. They stood as Lucien approached, their expressions carefully neutral. "Gentlemen," Lucien said smoothly, shifting into Japanese so fluid it sounded like his first language. "I apologize for the delay. I'd like to introduce my wife." Nyla felt her mind catch up with the situation. Japanese. She'd studied it for 2 years, could read it better than speak it, but "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said in Japanese, bowing at exactly the right angle for a formal introduction. The words came automatically, trained into her by years of language study. "My husband has spoken very highly of your partnership." The effect was immediate. The oldest man, easily 70, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, smiled for the first time. "Your wife speaks Japanese," he said to Lucien, pleasure evident in his tone. "You didn't mention this." "My wife has many talents," Lucien replied, and the pride in his voice sounded so genuine that Nyla almost believed it herself. "She teaches 6 languages. I'm fortunate she tolerates my business schedule." For the next 20 minutes, Nyla played the role of devoted wife with an accuracy that terrified her. She laughed at the right moments, touched Lucien's arm at the right intervals, deflected personal questions with graceful vagueness, and she watched, with growing horror and fascination, as Lucien transformed from cold predator into charming businessman. He was good at it, too good. The kind of good that came from years of practice. From wearing masks so long you forgot what your real face looked like. By the time they left table 7, the Yakuza men were smiling, relaxed, ready to sign contracts that would move millions of dollars through Lucien's shipping routes. And Nyla understood with crystal clarity that she'd just become the most valuable lie Lucien Kade had ever told. They didn't speak as they walked back to their table. Didn't speak as Lucien paid the bill with a black card that had no credit limit. Didn't speak in the private elevator that descended to the underground parking garage where a black Mercedes waited, flanked by 2 SUVs full of security. It wasn't until they were inside the Mercedes, bulletproof windows rolling up, that Lucien finally turned to face her. "Victor Zhao," he said. Not a question. Nyla's hands twisted in her lap. "My father owed him money. Gambling debts. $4 million. Her voice came out hollow. "Victor said he'd forgive everything if I—" She couldn't finish. Couldn't say the words out loud. "If you became his property," Lucien finished flatly, "his reward for being patient about the debt." Nyla nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Seoul's lights blurred past the tinted windows. The city looked beautiful from inside an armored car, clean, safe, nothing like the reality she'd been living for the past month, dodging Victor's men, watching her mother's hospital bills pile up, understanding too late that her father had sold her to a monster. "Victor Zhao runs trafficking routes through Eastern Europe," Lucien said finally. "Girls mostly, sometimes boys. He's careful, uses legitimate business as cover. Semiconductors, electronics manufacturing. He's also arrogant and stupid, which makes him dangerous in unpredictable ways." Lucien's fingers drummed once against his knee. "If you walk away tonight, he'll find you within 48 hours. Your father's debt guarantees it." Nyla closed her eyes. "I know. So here's your option." Lucien's voice stayed matter-of-fact, clinical. "You become my wife, not just for tonight, for 6 months. You live in my home, you appear at my side during business functions. You play the role you just played with the Yakuza investors, devoted, intelligent, real enough that no one questions it." He paused. "In exchange, Victor Zhao doesn't touch you. No one touches you. And at the end of 6 months, I pay your father's debt in full, and you walk away with enough money to start over wherever you want." Nyla opened her eyes. "Why?" "Because you just made me $40 million, Lucien said simply. "Because the Yakuza investors believed you. Because a man with a wife is more dangerous than a man alone. People respect what they think they understand. His gaze held hers. And because Victor Zhao is a problem I've been meaning to handle, having his property suddenly become my wife, that's motivation for him to make mistakes. The logic was cold, brutal. Exactly what Nyla should have expected from a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear. "What if I say no?" she asked. Lucien's expression didn't change. "Then I'd drop you at the nearest subway station and you take your chances with Victor's men." He tilted his head slightly. "How long do you think you'd last?" The Mercedes turned a corner and Nyla caught a glimpse of the Han River through the window. Dark water reflecting city lights. Beautiful and cold, and deep enough to swallow someone without a trace. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about the mounting bills her teaching salary couldn't cover, about her father, who'd looked her in the eye and told her that sometimes family meant sacrifice, and he'd already sacrificed enough. About Victor Zhao's smile when his men had cornered her in her apartment 3 nights ago. The way he'd touched her hair and told her she'd learned to be grateful. 6 months, she heard herself say. "And then I'm free?" 6 months, Lucien confirmed. "You play your role. I pay the debt. You disappear." "What about—" Nyla's throat tightened. "What about the marriage? Is it—" "Legal paperwork," Lucien interrupted. "We'll file the documents tomorrow. To the government, to immigration, to everyone who matters. You'll be Nyla Kade. But it's a contract, nothing more. You'll have your own room, your own space. I'm not—" Something flickered across his face. Not quite emotion, just an acknowledgement of boundaries. "I'm not Victor Zhao." Nyla studied him in the dim light of the car. Tried to see past the scar, the cold eyes, the reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. Tried to figure out if she was making a deal with the devil or just trading one monster for another. But the truth was simple and terrible. She was out of choices. "Okay," she whispered. 6 months. Lucien nodded once. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. The expensive kind with security features she didn't recognize. He typed something quickly, then handed it to her. "Your new number," he said. "Memorize it. Your old phone is compromised. Victor's people have been tracking it for weeks. From this moment on, you don't contact anyone from your previous life. Not friends, not family, no one." Nyla stared at the phone in her hand. "My mother will be taken care of." Lucien's tone left no room for argument. "I'll have her medical bills handled by tomorrow morning. She'll never know where the money came from, but you don't contact her directly, ever. That's non-negotiable." The phone felt heavy, final, like accepting it meant crossing a line she could never uncross. Nyla closed her fingers around it. The Mercedes pulled into an underground garage that looked more like a military bunker than a parking structure. Armed guards, security cameras, reinforced concrete walls. The SUVs that had followed them pulled into flanking positions, and men in dark suits emerged, their movements coordinated and professional. Lucien's hand found her elbow as they exited the car. Not rough, just firm. Guiding her toward a private elevator with a biometric scanner that read his palm print before the doors slid open. The elevator ride lasted 45 seconds, long enough for Nyla to notice that Lucien's breathing never changed, that his posture stayed relaxed despite the tension coiling beneath his expensive suit, that he smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, gunpowder, maybe, or just the weight of violence that clung to men who lived in his world. The doors opened onto a penthouse that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's skyline. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than most people's houses. Art on the walls that Nyla recognized from auction catalogs she'd never be able to afford. A woman waited in his living room. Late 30s, wearing a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked at Nyla the way a scientist might examine a virus sample, with clinical detachment and underlying hostility. "Seraphine," Lucien said by way of introduction. "My strategist. She handles political connections and information management. Seraphine, this is Nyla, my wife." Seraphine's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "I see. And when exactly were you planning to inform me that you'd acquired a wife?" "Tonight," Lucien said simply. "Because I acquired her tonight. At the Yamamoto negotiation." Seraphine's gaze swept over Nyla, cataloging every detail. The designer dress that Nyla had bought with her last credit card, the smeared mascara, the fear she couldn't quite hide. Convenient timing? Extremely, Lucien agreed. Seraphine turned back to him. Immigration will have questions. So will Victor Zhao. So will every criminal organization in Asia who's been watching you for weaknesses. Her voice stayed level, professional. I'll need her background, her family history, every detail that could be weaponized against you. Tomorrow, Lucien said. Tonight, she needs a room and clothes that fit. And security clearance, a new voice added from the hallway. Nyla turned to see a man built like a wall. 6'4", shoulders that barely fit through door frames, and a face that looked like it had stopped caring about pain sometime in the previous decade. His eyes swept over her with the same clinical assessment as Seraphine's, but his threat was more immediate. Physical. Ronan Graves, Lucien said, head of security. If someone tries to kill you, he's the reason they fail. If she's worth protecting, Ronan said flatly. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed. Which remains to be seen. Nyla forced herself to stand straighter, to meet his gaze despite every instinct screaming that looking at men like Ronan Graves too directly was dangerous. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly. No, Ronan agreed. You just crashed into our world and expected us to catch you. He moved closer, crowding her space deliberately, testing. You know what happens to liabilities in our line of work? Ronan, Lucien said, not loud, just final. Ronan stopped, stepped back, but the message was clear. Nyla was being evaluated, measured, and if she came up short, there were people in this penthouse who would remove the problem with professional efficiency. Show her to the guest room, Lucien told Seraphine, and make sure she understands the rules. Seraphine nodded and gestured for Nyla to follow. They walked down a hallway lined with more expensive art, past rooms with closed doors that Nyla suspected hid things she didn't want to see. The guest room at the end was larger than her entire apartment had been. King bed, private bathroom, a closet that could have doubled as a studio. Rules are simple, Seraphine said, turning to face her. You don't leave this penthouse without security. You don't make phone calls without clearance. You don't speak to media, police, or government officials without Lucien present. You don't ask questions about business that doesn't concern you. And you, her eyes narrowed, you don't forget that this is a performance. The moment you become a liability instead of an asset, this arrangement ends, permanently. Nyla's hands clenched at her sides. I understand. Do you? Seraphine stepped closer. I've worked with Lucien for 8 years. I've seen him negotiate with warlords, dismantled rival syndicates, and build an empire that most men couldn't manage in 3 lifetimes. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't act on impulse. So the fact that he brought you here tonight tells me one of 2 things. Either you're incredibly valuable or incredibly dangerous. Her smile was razor thin. Time will tell which. She left without another word. Nyla stood alone in the unfamiliar room, listening to the city hum 40 floors below. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window. A woman in a torn designer dress, mascara smeared across her cheeks, standing in a glass tower that might as well have been a prison. She'd escaped Victor Zhao's cage by walking directly into Lucien Kade's. And she had no idea which monster she should have feared more. Sleep didn't come. Nyla lay on top of the expensive sheets, still wearing the dress she'd worn to the restaurant, and watched Seoul's lights blink through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere out there, Victor Zhao was receiving news that his purchased property had become another man's wife. Somewhere out there, her father was probably celebrating his debt relief without wondering what it had cost his daughter. And somewhere in this same penthouse, Lucien Kade was making calculations about exactly how long she'd remain useful before becoming expendable. At 3 a.m., her new phone buzzed, a text message. No name, just 3 words. Training starts dawn. Nyla stared at the screen until it went dark again. Dawn came at 5:30, gray light bleeding through the windows like a wound that wouldn't close. Nyla hadn't slept. Her body felt hollow, running on adrenaline fumes and the kind of exhaustion that made everything feel slightly unreal. She'd changed out of the torn dress sometime around 4, finding clothes in the closet that fit her perfectly. Black athletic leggings, a fitted tank top, running shoes that looked expensive and unused. Someone had measured her, studied her, prepared for her arrival before she'd even crashed into that restaurant. The thought made her skin crawl. Her new phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Rooftop. Now. Nyla's hand shook as she tied her hair back. She studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, the residue of fear still etched into every line of her face. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who'd gambled everything on a stranger and didn't know yet if she'd won or lost. The penthouse was silent as she moved through it. Empty. She'd expected guards, security, someone watching her every move, but the hallways stayed quiet, the expensive art on the walls observing her with painted eyes that revealed nothing. The elevator to the rooftop required a key card she found waiting on the kitchen counter. No note, just the card, matte black with a single red stripe. The doors opened onto a space that shouldn't have existed 40 floors above Seoul. A full gym had been built on the rooftop. Weight equipment, punching bags, a fighting ring with padded mats, and an outdoor track that circled the entire perimeter. The morning air bit cold, carrying the smell of exhaust and rain from the city below. Lucien waited in the center of the ring, wearing black training pants and nothing else. Nyla stopped at the edge of the mats. In the restaurant, Lucien's suit had made him look dangerous but controlled, professional. This was different. His bare torso revealed a map of violence, old scars crisscrossing his ribs, a burn mark on his left shoulder, what looked like a bullet wound below his collarbone. His body was built for damage, every muscle defined not from vanity but from necessity, from survival. He didn't look at her, just wrapped his hands methodically, each movement precise. "Get in," he said. Nyla climbed through the ropes. The mat felt solid under her feet, real, more real than anything else that had happened in the past 12 hours. "I don't know how to fight," she said. "I know." Lucien finished wrapping his left hand and finally met her eyes. In the gray dawn light, his face looked carved from stone. Ancient. That's the problem. He moved before she could respond. Not fast, not aggressive. Just a casual step forward that somehow put him directly in her space, his hand reaching for her throat in a grip that stopped just short of contact. "Dead," he said flatly. "Someone grabs you like this, you have maybe 2 seconds before you pass out. 3, if they're playing with you." His hand dropped. "Show me what you'd do." Nyla's mind went blank. I don't." "Exactly." Lucien stepped back. "You'd freeze, you'd panic, you'd die." He gestured at her. "Try to hit me." "What?" "Throw a punch. Aim for my face." Nyla hesitated, then swung awkwardly. Her fist moved in slow motion, telegraphed and clumsy. Lucien caught her wrist before the punch landed, twisted slightly, and suddenly Nyla was on her knees with her arm bent at an angle that made her shoulder scream. He released her immediately. Again. She tried 4 more times. Each attempt ended the same way. On the mat, breathing hard, her body betraying her with every movement. "You're thinking," Lucien said after the 5th failure. "That's your first mistake. Thinking takes time. Time gets you killed." He pulled her to her feet. "Hit me again. But this time don't aim, don't plan, just react." Nyla swung. Lucien blocked it, but something in his expression shifted. "Better. Your body knows what to do, your brain just gets in the way." He moved behind her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Victor's men are going to come for you. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but they will come. And when they do, I need to know you won't fold." His breath was warm against her ear, too close. Nyla jerked away instinctively, spinning to face him. "I'm not a soldier," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm a linguistics teacher. I'm not—" "You're a liability," Lucien interrupted. His eyes stayed flat, cold. "Right now, you're a pretty story that made me money. But if Victor's men get their hands on you, you become leverage, a weakness they can exploit. So either you learn to survive," he stepped closer, "or you become a problem I solve permanently." The threat hung in the air between them. Nyla's hands clenched. "You said 6 months. You said—" "I said a lot of things." Lucien's expression didn't change. "But the deal only works if you're alive to complete it. So we train, every morning, until your body remembers how to fight, even when your brain shuts down from fear." He turned away from her, walking to the edge of the ring. The conversation was over. decided. Nyla was supposed to follow orders now, so she's supposed to accept this new reality where she learned violence from a man who wore it like a second skin. But something in her snapped. No, she said. Lucien stopped, didn't turn around, just went very, very still. No? He repeated softly. I didn't agree to become a soldier. I agreed to play a role. To be your wife at dinner parties and business meetings. Not, Nyla gestured at the ring, at him, at everything. Not this. Lucien turned slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled, and somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. You think playing dress-up is enough? His voice stayed quiet. You think smiling at Yakuza investors and speaking pretty Japanese keeps you safe? You said you weren't Victor, Nyla shot back. You said, I'm not. Lucien crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Victor would have already raped you, broken you, sold you to whoever paid the most. I'm giving you a chance to survive what's coming, so you can either take it. His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Or you can walk out that door right now and see how long you last on Seoul streets with a $4 million bounty on your head. Nyla's breath came in sharp gasps. Lucien's fingers were firm against her jaw, not painful, but unyielding. She could see herself reflected in his dark eyes, small, frightened, completely out of her depth. I'm trying to keep you alive, he said, quieter now, almost gentle, even if you're too stubborn to see it. He released her and stepped back. The moment broke. Nyla's legs felt weak, her hands still shaking with adrenaline and fury, and something else she didn't want to name. Training starts at dawn, Lucien said, his tone back to flat professionalism. Every day, non-negotiable. Learn fast or don't learn at all. Your choice. He walked past her, leaving her alone in the ring with the sun slowly burning through Seoul's smog. Nyla stood there for a long time, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip, feeling the ghost of his fingers against her jaw. She wanted to leave, wanted to run, wanted to go back to her small apartment and her safe teaching job and her ordinary life. But that life was gone, burned away the moment Victor's men had cornered her in that restaurant. So instead, she pulled herself together, wiped the sweat from her face, and started learning how to survive. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of violence and exhaustion. Every morning at dawn, Lucien dragged Nyla through training that left her muscles screaming and her pride in pieces. He taught her how to break a chokehold, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to find the soft spots in a human body where even a small woman could inflict serious damage. Eyes, throat, groin, knees. The targets that didn't require strength, just precision and the willingness to hurt someone before they hurt you. Nyla learned, slowly, painfully. But she learned. The rest of her days were spent inside the penthouse, which felt less like a home and more like a gilded prison. Seraphine drilled her on Lucien's business interests, his legitimate holdings, the cover stories they'd use if immigration came asking questions. Nyla memorized it all. The gallery opening where they'd supposedly met, the private dates Lucien allegedly took her on, the reasons they'd kept their relationship secret. You're a decent liar, Seraphine admitted one afternoon, reviewing Nyla's answers to mock interrogation questions. Better than I expected. I'm a teacher, Nyla said flatly. I've been lying to disinterested students for 3 years. This isn't that different. Seraphine's smile was cold. No, it's exactly that different, because when a student catches you in a lie, you fail them. When immigration catches you, we all go to prison. And when Victor Zhao catches you, she let the sentence hang. Well, you already know what happens then. The marriage paperwork came through on day 12. Nyla sat in a government office beside Lucien, signing documents that made their fake relationship legally binding. The official who processed their forms barely looked up, stamped everything with bureaucratic efficiency, and handed them a certificate that might as well have been a prison sentence. Nyla Kade. The name looked wrong on official documents, like someone else's life. How does it feel? Lucien asked as they left the building, security flanking them on all sides. Being Mrs. Kade? Like selling my soul, Nyla said. Lucien glanced at her. Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement, but close. Welcome to the club. The first real test came on day 18. Lucien had a business dinner at an upscale restaurant in Gangnam. Japanese investors again, but different ones this time. Automotive executives looking to use Lucien's shipping routes to move luxury vehicles through Southeast Asia. Legitimate business that absolutely wasn't legitimate. Nyla wore a dress Seraphine had selected. Midnight blue, elegant but not flashy, expensive enough to belong but not so expensive it screamed new money. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style. Minimal jewelry. The whole look said established, confident, invisible in the right way. The restaurant was the kind of place where politicians had affairs and billionaires made deals that would never appear on tax forms. Private rooms. Servers who understood that discretion was worth more than tips. Security that knew how to look everywhere while appearing to look nowhere. Lucien's hand found the small of her back as they entered. The touch was familiar now, practiced. They'd spent the past 2 weeks learning each other's body language, the small gestures that sold a relationship as real. The way he guided her through doorways. The way she touched his arm when making a point. The way they moved through space like two people who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. The investors were already seated. 3 men in their 50s, expensive suits, the kind of careful politeness that masked ruthless business instincts. They stood when Nyla entered, bowing slightly in acknowledgement. "My wife, Nyla," Lucien said in Japanese, introducing her with the same casual pride he'd used at that first restaurant. "She'll be joining us this evening." "A pleasure," the oldest investor said, his eyes sweeping over Nyla with the assessment of a man who spent his life evaluating assets. "Your husband mentioned you teach linguistics. Impressive." Nyla smiled, took her seat beside Lucien, let the conversation flow around her in Japanese while she observed, catalogued, and played her role perfectly. 30 minutes in, one of the investors leaned forward. "Forgive my curiosity," he said, directing his words at Nyla with calculated politeness. "But I'm surprised we haven't heard of you before. Mr. Kade is quite well known in our circles, yet you've remained invisible." The table went quiet. Nyla felt Lucien's leg brush against hers under the table. A warning, a reminder. This was the test. The moment someone finally called their bluff. "My husband's business attracts a certain amount of attention," she said smoothly, her Japanese flawless. "When we married, we agreed that my privacy was worth protecting. I prefer teaching to tabloids." She met the investor's gaze directly. "I'm sure you understand. Men in your position must make similar choices about what to share and what to keep sacred." The investor studied her, then smiled. "Indeed. Wise of you both." The moment passed. The conversation moved on. But Nyla felt the weight of what she'd just done. The lies she'd just sold. The way she'd looked a powerful man in the eye and dared him to call her fake. When they finally left the restaurant 3 hours later, Nyla's face hurt from smiling. Her jaw ached. Her entire body felt like a tightly wound spring that hadn't been allowed to release. In the Mercedes, surrounded by bulletproof glass and armed security, Lucien finally spoke. "You did well," he said. Nyla turned to look at him. In the dim light from Seoul's passing streetlights, his face looked different, less harsh, almost human. "He knew," she said quietly. "That investor. He knew something was off." Of course he knew. Lucien's hand rested on the seat between them, inches from hers. Men like that don't survive by believing pretty stories. They survive by calculating risk. And right now, the risk of calling us liars is higher than the risk of doing business with someone who might be lying. "Because of your reputation," Nyla said. "Because I'm more dangerous than the truth." Lucien's eyes found hers. "And now, so are you. Welcome to the family business, Mrs. Kade." The name sounded different this time. Less like a joke. More like a brand being slowly burned into her skin. But the real problem started the next morning. Nyla woke to shouting, loud voices coming from somewhere in the penthouse, sharp enough to cut through the exhaustion that had pulled her under around 2 a.m. She grabbed her robe and moved into the hallway, following the sound to Lucien's office. The door was open. Inside, Ronan stood like a wall of fury, his face twisted with something between rage and disgust. "Can't be serious," he was saying, his gravelly voice loud enough to rattle windows. 2 weeks of background checks and we found nothing? No red flags? No connections to Victor that we should know about? "Clean," said a new voice. Female. Younger than Seraphine's. As clean as anyone gets in this city. Her father's in debt, yeah, but beyond that? She's nobody. A teacher. No criminal record. No suspicious contacts. Nobody doesn't crash into a restaurant and land in our world, Ronan shot back. Nobody doesn't speak 5 languages and think fast enough to fool Yakuza investors on her first night. Maybe she's just smart, the female voice suggested. Or maybe you're paranoid. Paranoia keeps us alive, Mika. Nyla stepped into the doorway. All 3 of them turned to look at her. Ronan with his perpetual hostility, a young woman with bright blue hair and multiple piercings who must be Mika, and Lucien himself standing behind his desk like a judge about to pronounce sentence. "Don't stop on my account," Nyla said, her voice cold despite the exhaustion still clinging to her bones. "Please, continue discussing whether I'm a spy or just incredibly lucky." Ronan's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here." "This is where I live," Nyla snapped back. "Or did you forget that part of the arrangement?" "The arrangement," Ronan repeated, stepping toward her, "is that you play your role and stay out of operational business. This," he gestured at the office, at the conversation she'd interrupted, "is operational." "It's about me," Nyla said, "which makes it my business." "It's about whether you're a threat," Ronan corrected, "which makes it my business. Security is my job, and right now you're the biggest security risk in this building." Lucien's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Enough." Ronan turned to face him. "You can't be serious about keeping her. Not long term. The 6 months, fine. We play the game, cash out, walk away. But I've seen how you look at her, how she's started fitting into spaces she shouldn't fit into. This isn't—" "I said enough." Lucien's tone dropped to something dangerous. "You don't make decisions about who stays or goes. I do. And Nyla stays until I decide otherwise." The room went silent. Mika watched the exchange with obvious fascination, her fingers drumming against what looked like 3 different phones clipped to her belt. "For what it's worth," she said into the quiet, "I vote we keep her. She's interesting. Plus, she's already legally married to the boss, so kicking her out now just creates more problems than it solves." "Nobody asked for your vote," Ronan growled. "Yeah, well, nobody asked for your tantrum either, but here we are." Mika's smile was sharp. "Face it, big guy. She's not going anywhere. Might as well get used to it." Ronan's hands clenched into fists. For a second, Nyla thought he might actually throw a punch. Instead, he turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy enough to shake the floor. The tension drained from the room slowly. Mika let out a low whistle. "Well, that was fun. I'm Mika, by the way. Tech specialist, hacker extraordinaire, and apparently the only person in this building with basic social skills." She stuck out a hand. "Welcome to the dysfunctional family." Nyla shook it automatically. Mika's grip was firm, her hands covered in thin scars that looked like burn marks. "You break into places digitally?" Nyla asked. "Places, banks, government databases, encrypted communications, you name it. I've probably already been there." Mika's grin widened. "I'm how Lucien stays 3 steps ahead of everyone who wants him dead. Which is a lot of people, by the way. You picked a real winner." "I didn't pick anything," Nyla said quietly. "I just survived." "Yeah, well," Mika's expression softened slightly. "Surviving is the hard part. Everything else is just details." She left too, whistling something under her breath that might have been a K-pop song. Lucien watched Nyla from behind his desk. His office was sparse. Just the desk, a few chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul, and a single piece of art on the wall. A painting of a storm, all dark clouds and churning water and lightning about to strike. "Ronan doesn't trust easily," Lucy Sayan said finally. "He doesn't trust at all," Nyla corrected. She moved further into the office, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. "He thinks I'm going to betray you, get you killed, ruin everything you've built." "Are you?" The question hung in the air. Nyla met his eyes. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm still trying to figure out if I'm surviving or just slowly drowning." Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Not softness exactly, just recognition. "Both," he said quietly. "It's always both." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people bound together by necessity and lies, trying to figure out if the thing growing between them was trust or just shared survival instinct. Then Lucien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire body went rigid. "What?" Nyla asked. Lucien looked up, his face carefully blank. Victor Zhao is requesting a meeting. The words hit like a physical blow. Nyla's breath caught in her chest. When? Tonight. Neutral territory. He says he wants to discuss. Lucien's jaw tightened. The misunderstanding about his property. Nyla felt the room tilt. His property? He means me. He means testing boundaries. Lucien set the phone down slowly. Seeing how far he can push before I push back. It's a power play. And if you don't meet him, then he escalates. Maybe goes after your mother. Maybe leaks information that tanks my business deals. Maybe just sends enough men to make this penthouse a war zone. Lucien's hands flexed once against the desk. Victor doesn't make idle threats. He's already calculating his next move. Nyla's legs felt weak. She sat down in one of the chairs facing Lucien's desk before they could give out. So what do? We go to the meeting, Lucien said flatly, and we remind Victor Zhao exactly who he's dealing with. You mean you go? Nyla said. I stay here, where it's safe. Lucien's expression didn't change. You're coming with me. That's insane. That's the point. Lucien leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. Victor thinks you're my weakness, something he can use against me. If you hide, you prove him right. But if you walk into that meeting on my arm, looking like you belong there, his eyes held hers. Then we prove you're not a weakness. You're a weapon. Nyla's hands twisted in her lap. I'm not ready for this. Nobody's ever ready. Lucien stood, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level. 3 weeks ago, you crashed into a restaurant and gambled your life on a stranger. You've survived every day since. You've trained. You've learned. You've played this role better than anyone expected. His hand reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that might have looked tender to anyone watching. So tonight, you do it again. You walk in there, you stand beside me, and you show Victor Zhao that you're not afraid of him anymore. But I am, Nyla whispered. I'm terrified. Good. Lucien's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, so quick she almost missed it. Terror keeps you sharp, just don't let him see it. He stood and walked out, leaving Nyla alone in his office with the storm painting and her racing heart. That night, Nyla stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes before Seraphine appeared in the doorway. Red dress, Seraphine said without preamble. The one with the slit, hair down, minimal jewelry except for your wedding ring. She moved into the room, pulling clothes from hangers with military efficiency. You're not dressing to be pretty, you're dressing to be remembered. To be someone Victor can't dismiss. What if he tries to take me? Nyla asked quietly. Seraphine paused, turned to look at her. Then Lucien will kill him, and probably everyone Victor brought with him, and possibly half the people in whatever building they meet in. She handed Nyla the red dress, but it won't come to that. Victor's smart enough to know that touching you in public would start a war he can't win. This is theater. Violence disguised as conversation. Just play your part. The dress fit like it had been designed specifically to make a statement. Deep red silk that clung to her body, a slit that ran up to mid-thigh, a neckline that was elegant but showed enough skin to remind everyone watching that she was desirable, powerful, taken. Nyla barely recognized herself in the mirror. Seraphine handed her a small clutch. Pepper spray, she said quietly, hidden in the lining. If things go wrong, aim for the eyes and run. I thought you said it wouldn't come to that, Nyla said. I said it probably wouldn't. Seraphine's smile was grim. But I've been wrong before. Better prepared than dead. The meeting was set for midnight in a private room at one of Gangnam's most exclusive clubs. The kind of place where celebrities partied and billionaires conducted business. And nobody asked questions about what happened in the VIP sections. Nyla rode in the Mercedes beside Lucien, surrounded by security. He dressed in a black suit with a blood-red tie that matched her dress. Deliberate, coordinated, every detail calculated to send a message. Remember, Lucien said as they pulled up to the club's private entrance, you don't speak unless Victor addresses you directly. You don't react to anything he says. You're calm, confident, and completely unafraid. Can you do that? Nyla's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, hiding the tremor. Yes. Liar, Lucien said, but there was something almost gentle in his tone. But that's okay. Lying is how we survive. They walked through the club like royalty. Security parted crowds ahead of them. Music pounded from multiple floors, bass so heavy Nyla could feel it in her chest. Strobe lights painted everything in flashes of blue and purple and red. People stared as they passed, recognition and fear mixing in their expressions. The VIP room was on the top floor. Private elevator. Armed guards at every entrance. Inside, the music was muffled to a dull thrum, replaced by the kind of silence that preceded violence. Victor Zhao sat at a table in the center of the room, flanked by four men who looked like they'd been carved from granite. He was younger than Nyla expected. Early 40s, handsome in a cold way, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a car. His smile when he saw her was sharp enough to draw blood. "Lucien," Victor said in perfect English, not standing. "And the lovely Nyla. How wonderful to finally meet properly." Lucien's hand pressed against Nyla's lower back, guiding her to a chair. She sat slowly, keeping her spine straight, her expression neutral, every cell in her body screaming run while her training forced her to stay still. "Victor," Lucien said, his tone flat, professional. "You requested this meeting, so talk." Victor's smile widened. His eyes stayed fixed on Nyla. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You see, 4 weeks ago, I purchased certain debts from a mutual acquaintance, debts that came with collateral." His gaze traveled down Nyla's body with deliberate slowness. "Collateral that seems to have wandered into someone else's possession." "My wife isn't collateral," Lucien said quietly. "She's exactly what I just called her. My wife." "Convenient timing, though, don't you think?" Victor leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Her father's debts come due. She runs, and within hours she's married to Seoul's most dangerous criminal. That's quite a story." "It's the truth," Nyla heard herself say. Victor's attention snapped to her. "Is it? Then tell me, Mrs. Kade, where did you and Lucien meet?" "A gallery opening," Nyla said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. 2 years ago, Gangnam, contemporary Korean artist. I was there with friends. He was there for business." She met Victor's eyes. "We talked about the paintings. He thought they were pretentious. I thought they were brilliant. We argued for an hour before he asked for my number." The lie flowed like truth. Every detail perfectly memorized, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that came from repetition. Victor studied her. "And you never mentioned your father's debts? Never asked your powerful husband for help?" "I didn't know Lucien had the kind of connections that could help," Nyla said. "I thought he ran shipping companies. Legitimate business. By the time I understood what he actually did..." She let herself pause, let emotion crack through slightly. "We were already in too deep, both of us. It was good." Nyla could see it in Victor's expression, the calculation, the doubt creeping in. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe this really was just terrible timing and complicated circumstances. But Victor hadn't built his empire by accepting easy answers. $4 million, he said softly. "That's what your father owes me. Plus interest. Plus penalties for breach of contract." His smile turned cruel. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Kade. I don't forgive debts out of sentimentality. So here's my offer. You leave with me tonight, fulfill the original agreement, and I'll consider Lucien's interference an honest mistake rather than an act of war." The room went cold. Lucien's hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching inside his jacket. Victor's guards tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The air felt charged, electric, one wrong move away from violence. But Lucien pulled out a checkbook, set it on the table, clicked a pen. $4 million, he said, writing, plus 3% interest calculated monthly since the original debt was issued. He tore out the check and slid it across the table. "There, debt paid in full. Nyla's free. And you get your money tonight instead of waiting for her father to finally pay up. Good business all around." Victor looked at the check, then laughed. Actually laughed, the sound cold and sharp. "You think this is about money? You think I spent weeks arranging collateral, tracking down her father, setting up payment plans. You think I did all that for money I could make in a single shipment?" He picked up the check and tore it in half. "This is about respect, about following through on agreements, about not letting some arrogant mafia boss steal what's mine simply because he can. Lucien's expression went flat. Dangerous. Nyla isn't yours. Her father's signature says differently. Victor pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. Legal paperwork, contract language. And at the bottom, a signature that Nyla recognized even from across the table. Her father's handwriting, selling her like property. Her vision swam. Nyla forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember that she was Mrs. Kade now, not some helpless victim. That contract, she said slowly, was signed under duress. My father was threatened, coerced. Any lawyer would throw it out in minutes. Which is why we're not involving lawyers, Victor said pleasantly. We're handling this the old-fashioned way, between men who understand how the real world works. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll give you 48 hours to reconsider, Lucien. Return what's mine, or I start making this personal. Your shipping routes, your legitimate businesses, your political connections. I have friends who owe me favors, and I'm very patient when it comes to revenge. He walked toward the door, his guards moving with him in perfect formation. But before he left, Victor stopped beside Nyla's chair, leaned down until his mouth was inches from her ear. Run all you want, he whispered, quiet enough that only she could hear. But in the end, you'll always be merchandise, and merchandise always ends up exactly where it belongs. Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Nyla sat frozen, Victor's words still echoing in her skull. Her hands shook in her lap. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that she couldn't control. Lucien stood slowly, moved around the table until he was kneeling in front of her, his hands gripping her arms firmly. Breathe, he said. Nyla, look at me. Breathe. She forced her eyes to focus on his face, on the scar along his jaw, on the cold fury burning in his eyes. He's not taking you, Lucien said, each word deliberate. Final. Do you understand? He can threaten. He can posture. He can make his plays. But you are not going back to him. Ever. He has a contract, Nyla whispered. I don't care about contracts. Lucien's grip tightened. He wants war? I'll give him war. He wants to make this personal? It's already personal. Nobody threatens what's mine and walks away unscathed. What's mine? The words should have made Nyla feel like property, like just another possession in Lucien's empire. Instead, they felt like armor. They left the club through a back exit, surrounded by enough security to start a small war. The Mercedes waited in a private garage, engine already running, every exit covered. But as they pulled onto Seoul's streets, Mika's voice crackled through the car's speakers. Boss, she said, tension evident even through the digital connection. We've got a problem. Multiple problems, actually. Immigration just flagged your marriage certificate. They're opening an investigation. Someone fed them information suggesting the marriage is fraudulent. Lucien's jaw tightened. Victor. Gets better, Mika continued. I'm seeing unusual activity on the port's security systems. Someone's been poking around your shipping manifests, specifically the routes you use for the Yakuza automotive contracts. And, she paused, someone leaked photos to 3 major news outlets, pictures of you and Nyla from that charity gala. They're running stories tomorrow morning questioning who she is, where she came from, and why Seoul's most eligible bachelor suddenly has a wife nobody's ever heard of. The Mercedes turned a corner and Nyla saw camera flashes in the distance. Paparazzi. Clustered outside the building's entrance, waiting like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. He's attacking from every angle, Seraphine's voice added over the comm. She must have been monitoring from the penthouse. Immigration, media, business operations. Classic pressure campaign. He's trying to force you into a mistake. Lucien's hand found Nyla's in the darkness of the car. His fingers laced through hers, holding tight. Then we don't make mistakes, he said quietly. Mika, shut down the media leaks. Feed them a better story. Something about our private wedding, how we kept it quiet for security reasons, make it romantic instead of suspicious. Seraphine, get our immigration lawyer on standby. We'll need documentation proving the marriage is legitimate. Bank records showing joint accounts, lease agreements, anything that shows cohabitation and shared finances. Already working on it, Seraphine confirmed. And the shipping routes? Mika asked. Lucien's expression went cold. Move everything. New routes, new contacts, new schedules. If Victor thinks he can sabotage my business, let him waste time chasing ghosts. The Mercedes pulled into the underground garage. Security swarmed the car immediately, checking for threats, securing the perimeter. Nyla let herself be guided into the elevator, through the penthouse, into the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows showed Seoul glittering like scattered diamonds. She felt like she was drowning, like Victor's words were water filling her lungs. Merchandise, that's all you are. Nyla. She turned to find Lucien watching her. Really watching her. Like he could see through all the carefully constructed walls she'd built over the past 3 weeks. I meant what I said, he told her quietly. You're not going back to him, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. You're staying here. Why? The word came out broken, raw. Why does it matter? I'm just part of a deal. Just school. Oh, yes, you're not. Lucien crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands framed her face, tilting her head up to meet his eyes. You stopped being just a deal the moment you looked at those Yakuza investors and made them believe you. The moment you didn't break during training. The moment you walked into that club tonight and faced Victor without flinching. His thumb brushed across her cheek. You're not merchandise, Nyla. He stopped. Whatever he'd been about to say, he swallowed it back. But his hand stayed on her face, and his eyes held something she'd never seen before, something that looked almost like fear. I should go, Nyla whispered, before this gets worse, before people die because of me, before, if you leave, you die, Lucien interrupted. That's not me being dramatic, that's reality. Victor has the resources to hunt you anywhere in the world, and he will hunt you. Not because he needs the money, but because you made him look weak in front of other criminals. That's unforgivable in our world. Then what do I do? Nyla's voice cracked. How do I survive this? Lucien's hands dropped from her face. He stepped back, and for just a second she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. The weight of running an empire built on violence. The isolation that came from being the most dangerous man in the room, always, with no one to share the burden. You survive, he said quietly, by becoming more dangerous than they expect, by learning their game and playing it better than they do, by turning weakness into weapon. His eyes met hers. And by trusting that I won't let them take you, not without going through me first. Nyla looked at him. This man who'd given her shelter when she had nowhere else to run, who'd turned her desperation into opportunity, who'd wrapped her in lies that somehow felt more real than any truth she'd ever known. Okay, she whispered. Okay? I trust you. The words felt dangerous, reckless, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if anyone would catch her. I don't know why. I should. I trust you. The words felt dangerous, reckless, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if anyone would catch her. I don't know why. I shouldn't. But I do. Lucien stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. Then he nodded once, turned away, and walked toward his office without another word. Nyla stood alone in the living room, watching Seoul's lights blur through the windows, wondering if trust was just another word for suicide. The next 72 hours were war. Immigration officials showed up at the penthouse with legal documents demanding proof of marital cohabitation. Seraphine handled them with surgical precision, presenting bank statements showing joint accounts, lease agreements with both their names, even carefully staged photographs that Mika had backdated to look 2 years old. Nyla sat through the interrogation with her spine straight and her answers smooth, playing the role of devoted wife so convincingly that even she almost believed it. The officials left unsatisfied but unable to prove fraud. Not yet. Meanwhile, Victor's attacks came from every direction. 3 of Lucien's shipping contracts were suddenly under investigation for customs violations. A warehouse in Busan burned to the ground under suspicious circumstances. 2 of Ronan's security team ended up in the hospital after a coordinated assault outside a club in Itaewon. And the media wouldn't stop. Paparazzi camped outside the building 24 hours a day. News outlets ran constant speculation about Nyla's mysterious past. Social media exploded with theories ranging from corporate espionage to international scandal. Someone leaked her teaching credentials, her apartment address, even her mother's hospital records. Nyla watched her private life get dissected on television while Lucien made phone calls in 3 different languages, shoring up alliances, calling in favors, preparing for a war that everyone knew was coming. "He's going to escalate," Seraphine said on the 4th night, standing in Lucien's office with files spread across his desk. "Victor doesn't do slow burns, he hits hard and fast. This preliminary phase is just softening the target." "Let him come," Lucien said, his voice flat. Cold. He'd barely slept in 4 days, and it showed in the darkness under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I've been preparing for this fight longer than he realizes." Nyla listened from the doorway, her body aching from that morning's brutal training session with Ronan. He'd stopped holding back after Victor's meeting, pushing her through drills that left her bruised and gasping, teaching her how to kill, not just defend, how to survive when survival required crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing. "There's something else," Mika said, appearing behind Nyla with her usual silent footwork. She held a tablet, her expression grim. "I've been tracking financial movements through Victor's network. Standard stuff, payoffs, bribes, the usual criminal accounting. But 3 days ago, a large sum moved through an offshore account. $2 million. Sent to someone here in Seoul." "Who?" Lucien asked. Mika's fingers flew across the screen. "That's the problem. The account's buried under so many layers of encryption it's going to take time to crack. But whoever it is, they're close. Someone with access to your operations, your schedule, your security protocols." The temperature in the room dropped. "A mole," Ronan said from his position by the window. "Victor planted someone inside our organization." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "When? We vet everyone. Background checks, surveillance, financial audits. Nobody gets close to Lucien without clearance." "Unless they were already close," Mika said quietly. "Unless they've been here for years. Waiting." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Lucien's jaw tightened. "Pull records on everyone. Anyone who's had access to operational information in the last 6 months. Cross-reference their financials with that offshore payment. If someone's been bought, I want to know who." They scattered to work, leaving Nyla and Lucien alone in the office. The storm painting on the wall seemed darker than usual, the lightning frozen mid-strike like a warning that never quite landed. "You should rest," Lucien said without looking at her. "Tomorrow's going to be worse." "How do you know?" Nyla asked. "Because it always gets worse before it ends." He finally turned to face her. "Victor's been quiet for 36 hours. No new attacks. No media leaks. That's not strategy. That's preparation. He's planning something big." Nyla moved into the office, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. "And when he makes his move, we respond." Lucien's hand rested on his desk, fingers drumming once. "Harder, faster, until he understands that coming after me was the worst mistake of his life." But there was something in his voice, a tension that hadn't been there before. Fear, maybe. Or doubt. Nyla recognized it because she felt it too. The sense that they were standing on the edge of something catastrophic, and one wrong step would send them both into the abyss. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort or reassurance, or just acknowledge the weight they were both carrying. But before she could find the words, her new phone buzzed. "Unknown number, text message. You don't know him like you think you do. Ask Lucien about Elise." Nyla stared at the screen until the letters blurred. "Who is it?" Lucien asked, moving around the desk toward her. Nyla's fingers tightened on the phone. "Wrong number," she lied, deleting the message before he could see it. "Just spam." But the name echoed in her head all night. Elise, Elise, Elise. Who was Elise? She tried searching online, found nothing, tried asking Mika casually the next morning during breakfast. Mika just shrugged, said the name meant nothing to her, and went back to her tablets. The question festered, grew, became an itch Nyla couldn't scratch. Finally, 3 days after receiving the text, Nyla cornered Seraphine in the penthouse library. The older woman was reviewing legal documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking more like a corporate executive than a criminal strategist. "Who's Elise?" Nyla asked without preamble. Seraphine's pen stopped moving. She didn't look up. "Why are you asking?" "Because someone told me to ask Lucien about her. Because the name clearly means something. Because I'm tired of being kept in the dark about things that might get me killed." Seraphine set down her pen slowly. removed her glasses. When she finally met Nyla's eyes, her expression was carefully neutral. "Elise Choi," she said quietly. "Lucien's first wife." The world tilted. Nyla grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. His what? Legally, his ex-wife. Emotionally, Seraphine's mouth tightened. That's more complicated. They married young, 23. She was a prosecutor's daughter, brilliant, idealistic, thought she could save him from the criminal world. A bitter smile crossed her face. She couldn't, and when she realized that, she tried to leave. Nyla's mouth went dry. "What happened?" "She died." Seraphine's voice stayed flat, matter of fact. "Car accident 6 years ago. Single vehicle collision on a mountain road outside Busan. Police ruled it suicide, though no note was ever found." The air felt too thick to breathe. Suicide. Or murder made to look like suicide. Seraphine picked up her pen again, like they were discussing weather instead of death. The night before she died, Elise met with prosecutors. She'd been gathering evidence against Lucien, financial records, witness testimony. She was going to testify, turn him in, destroy everything he'd built. Nyla sank into the chair, and then she died. Conveniently, Seraphine's eyes were cold. Lucien claimed he didn't know about her plans, claimed she'd just been depressed, struggling with their relationship, unable to handle the reality of who he was. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But either way, she's dead. And he's still here. The implications crashed over Nyla like a wave. She thought about Lucien's careful control, his cold calculation, the way he'd turned her desperation into opportunity without hesitation, the way he'd promised to protect her, just like he'd probably promised to protect Elise. Does he... Nyla's voice cracked. Does he ever talk about her? Never. Seraphine leaned back in her chair. After she died, Lucien shut down, stopped trusting anyone. Built walls so high even his inner circle can't get through them. That's why Ronan was so suspicious of you, why we all were, because the last woman Lucien cared about ended up dead under mysterious circumstances. She paused. And now here you are, another woman in danger, another convenient marriage, another opportunity for history to repeat itself. Nyla stood on shaking legs. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because it wasn't relevant. Seraphine's expression didn't change. Your arrangement with Lucien is transactional. 6 months, then you disappear. What happened with Elise doesn't change that. Unless I become a problem, Nyla said quietly. Unless I know too much. Unless keeping me alive becomes more dangerous than killing you, Seraphine finished. Yes, that's always the calculation, isn't it? Whether someone's more valuable breathing or buried. Nyla left the library on legs that barely held her weight. She made it to her room before the panic hit, before her breath came in gasps and her vision swam and her mind replayed every interaction with Lucien through this new, terrifying lens. He'd never mentioned a first wife, never mentioned a woman who'd tried to destroy him, never mentioned anything that might make Nyla question whether his protection was real or just another performance. Her phone buzzed again. Now you know. He kills what he can't control. So ask yourself, when the 6 months end, do you really think he'll just let you walk away? Nyla stared at the message until her hands stopped shaking enough to type a response. Who is this? The answer came immediately. Someone who wants Victor Zhao dead as much as you do. Meet me tomorrow. 2 p.m. Hongdae area. Come alone. I'll tell you everything. Nyla should have shown the messages to Lucien. Should have reported the contact immediately, should have trusted the man who'd been protecting her for the past month. But Elise's ghost whispered warnings Nyla couldn't ignore. So instead she deleted the messages, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and waited for tomorrow. The next afternoon, Nyla told Ronan she was going to a nearby bookstore. He assigned her 2 security guards who followed at a discreet distance while she browsed shelves and pretended to care about bestsellers. At exactly 1:55 p.m., Nyla walked into a small cafe in Hongdae's maze of side streets, the kind of place tourists never found. The security guards positioned themselves outside, visible through the windows. A woman sat at a corner table, late 30s, elegant in a subtle way, wearing dark sunglasses despite the dim interior. She looked up as Nyla approached, and something about her face was familiar in a way Nyla couldn't place. Nyla Kade, the woman said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Or should I say Nyla Mercer? Hard to keep track when you're playing so many roles. Nyla sat slowly. Who are you? The woman removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, haunted. My name is Catherine Choi, she said quietly. Elise was my sister. The cafe noise faded to white static. Nyla's fingers gripped the table edge hard enough to hurt. I know what Lucien told you about her death, Catherine continued. The official story. Suicide, depression, a troubled woman who couldn't handle reality. Her smile was bitter. It's all bullshit. My sister didn't kill herself. She was murdered. And the man who ordered it is the same man currently playing your devoted husband. Nyla forced herself to breathe. You have proof? I have 6 years of investigation. 6 years of tracking down witnesses Lucien paid to disappear. 6 years of reconstructing what really happened the night Elise died. Catherine pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. She met with prosecutors that afternoon, gave them everything. Financial records, shipping manifests, testimony about murders Lucien ordered personally. Then she drove to their country house to pack her things, to leave him for good. And she never made it. Catherine's hands clenched on the table. Her car went off a cliff on a mountain road. But the forensics don't match suicide. The brake lines were cut. The steering mechanism had been tampered with. Someone rigged her car to fail at high speed. Someone who knew exactly which route she'd take. Nyla opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were police reports, autopsy findings, photographs of a mangled vehicle at the bottom of a ravine, and detailed mechanical analysis showing deliberate sabotage. The police never investigated, Catherine said. Because Lucien owns half the precinct. Because investigating Seoul's most dangerous crime lord is a good way to end up dead. So they ruled it suicide and closed the case within 48 hours. Why tell me this? Nyla whispered. Why now? Catherine leaned forward. Because you're in the exact same position my sister was in. You're a woman who knows too much about Lucien's operations. You're legally married to him, which means you have access to information that could destroy him. And when your 6 months are up, her eyes bored into Nyla's. What do you think happens? Do you really believe he'll just let you walk away with everything you know? Nyla's throat closed. She thought about Lucien's careful control, his cold calculation, the way he'd turned her desperation into opportunity, the way he'd promised protection but never trust. He'll kill me, she said hollowly, just like he killed Elise. Catherine's hand covered Nyla's across the table. But you have something my sister didn't. You have warning, and you have me. I've been working with Victor Zhao for 3 months, feeding him information about Lucien's operations, helping him build a case strong enough to take Lucien down permanently. Nyla jerked her hand back. You're the mole. I'm justice. Catherine's expression stayed hard. Victor might be a monster, but at least he's honest about what he is. Lucien hides behind respectability and charm while destroying anyone who threatens him. So yes, I've been helping Victor, and now I'm offering you the same choice I wish someone had offered my sister. What choice? Help us destroy him. Catherine's voice dropped to barely a whisper. You're inside his organization. You have access to his files, his communications, his schedule. Get us what we need. Evidence of his murders, proof of his corruption, names of officials he's bought. And when Victor takes him down, you get immunity, protection, a new life far away from all of this. Nyla stared at the folder in her hands, at the photographs of a car that had been someone's coffin, at the forensic reports that screamed murder instead of suicide. And if I refuse? Catherine's smile was sad. Then you end up like my sister. Another convenient accident. Another woman who knew too much and paid for it with her life. She stood, leaving money on the table for coffee Nyla hadn't even noticed arriving. I'll contact you again in 3 days. Think carefully about which side of history you want to die on. She walked out, leaving Nyla alone with evidence that Lucien Kade was exactly the monster everyone said he was. Nyla sat in that cafe for 20 minutes, staring at the folder, her mind spinning through every interaction she'd had with Lucien, looking for signs she'd missed, warnings she'd ignored, proof that the man she'd started trusting was actually planning her murder. The security guards outside checked their watches. Time to go. Nyla closed the folder, tucked it into her bag, and walked out into Hongdae's crowded streets feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. That night, Nyla couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing Elise's mangled car in her mind. She lay in bed listening to the penthouse's silence, wondering if Lucien was in his office right now making plans, calculating the exact moment when Nyla would transition from asset to liability, from protected to eliminated. At 3 a.m., her door opened. Nyla's hand flew to the pepper spray Seraphine had given her, hidden in her nightstand drawer. But it was just Lucien, standing in her doorway like a shadow that had learned to walk. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. Nyla's heart hammered against her ribs. "Just thinking." "About Victor?" Lucien moved into the room slowly, non-threatening, but Nyla saw the predator beneath the careful control. The man who'd supposedly killed his first wife, rather than let her testify against him. "Among other things," Nyla said. Lucien sat on the edge of her bed, close enough to touch, close enough to kill. "I know this is hard," he said, "harder than I expected it to be. When I made the deal with you, I thought it would be simple, transactional, 6 months of performance in exchange for survival. And now?" Nyla's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Now it's complicated." Lucien's hand reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in that gesture that might have looked tender to anyone watching. "You've become—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with words he'd never had to find before. "Important. More important than the deal. More important than the business advantages. Just important." Nyla's eyes burned. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think the concern in his voice was real instead of just another layer of manipulation. But Elise had probably believed him too, right up until her car went off that cliff. "I'm tired," Nyla said, pulling away from his touch. "Can we talk tomorrow?" Something flickered across Lucien's face. Hurt, maybe? Or just recognition that she was slipping away. "Of course." He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "Nyla, whatever you're thinking, whatever doubts you're having, just remember that I've kept you alive this long. That means something." "Does it?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "Or does it just mean I'm still useful?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "You don't trust me." "Should I?" The silence stretched between them like a blade. "No," Lucien said finally. "You probably shouldn't. Trust in my world is just another word for weakness, a vulnerability people exploit. So no, Nyla, don't trust me. Don't trust anyone. Just survive. That's all any of us can do." He left without another word. Nyla lay in the darkness, tears sliding down her temples into her hair, wondering when she'd become the kind of person who had to choose between monsters. The next 2 days were torture. Nyla moved through the penthouse like a ghost, playing her role while her mind screamed warnings. She avoided Lucien when possible, trained with Ronan in silence, let Seraphine drill her on immigration questions without really listening. And she thought about Catherine's offer, about evidence hidden in Lucien's files, about the choice between staying silent and becoming another convenient accident, or betraying the man who'd saved her life to destroy him first. On the third night, Nyla made her decision. She waited until 2 a.m., when the penthouse was silent except for the hum of climate control and distant city noise. Lucien was in his office, working late as always. Ronan had taken the night security shift, which meant he'd be monitoring the building's exterior. Seraphine had gone home hours ago. Mika was probably asleep in her tech room, surrounded by servers and screens. Nyla moved through the hallways in bare feet, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd memorized Lucien's office layout weeks ago, knew where he kept his files, knew the location of his personal safe, a biometric lock hidden behind the storm painting. She also knew his thumbprint was stored in his phone, and she'd watched him enter his backup password enough times to reconstruct it. Getting into the office was easy. The door wasn't locked. Lucien didn't fear threats inside his own home. The office was dark, except for the glow of Seoul's lights through the windows. The storm painting watched her with frozen lightning as she moved toward it. Her hands shook as she lifted the painting off the wall. The safe behind it was exactly where she'd expected. Digital lock, fingerprint scanner, backup keypad. Nyla pulled out her phone. Mika had shown her once, casually, how to bypass biometric security using lifted prints in a simple app. It had seemed like a joke at the time, a party trick. Now it felt like salvation. She pressed her phone screen against the scanner, held her breath, waited. The safe clicked open. Inside were folders, passports, stacks of cash in multiple currencies, and a single thumb drive labeled with a date from 6 years ago, the date Elise Choi died. Nyla's hands trembled as she reached for it. "I was wondering when you'd make your move," a voice said behind her. Nyla spun around, her breath stopping in her throat. Lucien stood in the doorway, not angry, not surprised, just watching her with those cold, empty eyes that had never learned how to lie. "How long have you known?" Nyla whispered. "Since the cafe in Hongdae." Lucien stepped into the office slowly. "Did you really think I don't monitor your security detail? That I wouldn't notice when you met Catherine Choi?" He moved closer. "I've been waiting to see what you'd do. Whether you'd come to me with the information, whether you'd trust me enough to ask for the truth instead of stealing it." Nyla's back pressed against the safe. "And now?" "Now you've made your choice." Lucien stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Nyla could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of too many years carrying too much violence. "Take the drive. Look at what's on it. Then decide if Catherine told you the truth or if she fed you exactly what Victor Zhao wanted you to believe." He turned and walked out, leaving Nyla alone with the open safe and the thumb drive that might contain her salvation or damnation. Nyla grabbed it with shaking hands, closed the safe, put the painting back, then ran to her room and locked the door. Her laptop sat on the desk. She plugged in the drive with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Files loaded slowly. Video files, audio recordings, documents. Nyla opened the first video, grainy security footage, a parking garage, timestamp from 6 years ago. A woman walking to her car, elegant, beautiful, looking over her shoulder like she knew someone was watching. Elise. Nyla's breath caught as she watched Elise get into her car, start the engine, drive toward the exit. Then the camera angle changed, showed someone following her. Not Lucien, someone else. A man Nyla didn't recognize, wearing a suit, moving with professional efficiency. The video cut to dash cam footage, Elise's car on a mountain road, driving normally. Then suddenly the steering failed. The car veered, Elise screamed. The vehicle went off the cliff in a spiral of metal and glass in terror. Nyla's stomach heaved. But the video kept playing, showed emergency responders arriving, showed police taking statements, and then showed something that made Nyla's blood freeze. Victor Zhao, standing at the top of the cliff, watching the wreckage, smiling. The next file was an audio recording, Victor's voice, younger but unmistakable. "She had the evidence, would have destroyed everything Kade built, so I handled it. Clean, professional, looked like suicide. Even Kade bought it." Another voice, older, rough. "And the payment? 2 million, offshore, untraceable. Lucien will never know I'm the one who saved his empire." The recording ended. Nyla sat frozen, her mind trying to process what she'd just heard. Victor had killed Elise. Not Lucien. Victor had murdered a woman to protect Lucien's organization, then spent 6 years letting Lucien believe it was suicide, all while planning to use that same evidence to destroy him. And Catherine. Catherine, who claimed to want justice for her sister. Catherine, who'd fed Nyla lies to turn her against the one man who'd actually tried to save her. Catherine, who was working with the man who'd murdered Elise. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Nyla's hands clenched in her hair, pulling hard enough to hurt. She'd almost done it. Almost betrayed Lucien. Almost destroyed the only person standing between her and Victor's vengeance. A knock on her door made her jump. "Nyla." Lucien's voice. Quiet. "Can I come in?" She opened the door with shaking hands. Lucien stood in the hallway, still dressed, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "You watched it," he said. Not a question. Nyla nodded, not trusting her voice. "I didn't kill her," Lucien said quietly. "I loved her. Despite everything, despite her plans to destroy me, I would have let her go, let her testify, let her walk away." His jaw tightened. But Victor decided she was too dangerous, decided my organization was worth more than her life. So he killed her and made it look like I'd done it. Made me believe for 6 years that she'd chosen death over me. "Catherine," Nyla started, "has been Victor's tool from the beginning. Lucien's eyes held hers. He found her 3 years ago, fed her lies, convinced her I'd murdered her sister, turned her grief into a weapon he could aim at me. And now he's trying to do the same thing with you. Nyla's legs gave out. She sat on the edge of her bed, the thumb drive still clutched in her hand. I know. Lucien crouched in front of her, his hands gripping her knees. Not painful, just grounding. But you didn't. You could have copied those files, could have handed them to Catherine without watching them, but you looked at the truth instead. That counts for something. Does it? Nyla's voice cracked. I was ready to betray you, ready to believe you were a murderer, ready to survive. Lucien's thumb traced a circle on her knee. That's not betrayal. That's smart. In your position, I would have done the same thing. Nyla looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the cold exterior to the man underneath, the one who'd loved a woman enough to let her destroy him, the one who'd carried the guilt of her death for 6 years, the one who was trying, however imperfectly, to keep Nyla alive in a world designed to kill her. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Lucien stood, pulling her to her feet. Be angry. Be suspicious. Be ready to run if I give you reason, but don't apologize for trying to survive. He started to leave, but Nyla's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Catherine's going to come back, she said. She checked her phone. 16 hours. She's expecting an answer, information, proof that I'm willing to betray you. Lucien's expression went cold, calculating. Then we give her what she wants. What? You meet her, Lucien said slowly, his mind clearly working through possibilities. You tell her yes. You agree to help destroy me. You feed her information, carefully curated, mostly useless, but convincing enough that she believes you're committed. And while she thinks she's playing you, his smile was sharp enough to draw blood. We use her to get to Victor. Nyla's breath caught. You want me to be a double agent? I want you to be exactly what Catherine thinks you are. A desperate woman willing to betray anyone to survive. Lucien's hand covered hers on his wrist. Can you do that? Can you lie to someone who's lying to you? Can you play the role so well that even Victor Zhao believes it? Nyla thought about the past month, about learning to fight, to survive, to become someone she'd never imagined becoming, about standing in that restaurant and claiming Lucien as her husband, about facing Victor in that club without flinching, about watching evidence of Elise's murder and choosing truth over convenient lies. Yes, she said. I can do that. Lucien nodded slowly. Then tomorrow, you become the weapon that destroys them both. He left her alone with that promise hanging in the air like smoke. Nyla stood in her room holding a thumb drive full of truth, wondering if she'd just agreed to save herself or signed her own death warrant. Outside, Seoul's lights blinked against the darkness, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the war being waged in glass towers above the city. And somewhere out there, Victor Zhao was making plans of his own, not knowing that the prey he'd been hunting had just learned how to hunt back. The next 16 hours felt like drowning in slow motion. Nyla spent the morning in Lucien's office with Seraphine and Mika building the perfect lie. Documents that looked authentic but contained subtle errors. Financial records that would lead Victor's people down dead ends. Communications logs that seemed damning but revealed nothing of actual value. It has to be good enough to fool someone who's been investigating Lucien for 3 years, Seraphine said, reviewing the fabricated evidence spread across the desk. Catherine's not stupid. Neither is Victor. One wrong detail and they'll know you're playing them. Which is why we mix truth with fiction, Mika added, her fingers flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously. Real locations, real names, but fake transactions. This shipping manifest, she pulled up a document, shows an actual route Lucien used 2 years ago. But the cargo listed? Complete fabrication. Victor will waste weeks tracking down something that never existed. Nyla studied the papers, memorizing every detail, every lie she'd have to sell as truth. Her hands didn't shake anymore. That surprised her. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a linguistics teacher who couldn't throw a punch. Now she was preparing to betray a criminal organization while actually betraying the people trying to destroy it. She wasn't sure what that made her. Survivor, maybe. or just another monster learning to wear a human face? Lucien watched from behind his desk, silent. He'd barely spoken since last night, just observed with those cold, calculating eyes while his team built the trap that might save them all or kill them trying. What about Catherine? Nyla asked. When she reports back to Victor that I'm cooperating, won't he want to meet me? Verify I'm legitimate? Absolutely, Seraphine said, which is why we're going to give him exactly what he wants. A face-to-face meeting. You, alone, with Victor Zhao, wearing a wire, getting him to confess everything. Nyla's stomach dropped. That's insane. That's the only way this works. Lucien finally spoke, his voice flat. Victor needs to believe you're desperate enough to betray me. The only thing more convincing than stolen documents is you walking into his territory and offering yourself up as his asset, his spy inside my organization. He'll kill me, Nyla said. Probably. Lucien's expression didn't change. Unless you're better at lying than he is at spotting liars. Unless you can sell him the story that you're more afraid of me than you are of him. Unless, he leaned forward, you can make him believe that destroying me is worth more to you than your own survival. The weight of what he was asking settled over Nyla like concrete. And if I can't, then we've already lost. Lucien stood, moving around the desk until he was inches away. Victor's coming for us either way. This just gives us a chance to choose the battlefield instead of letting him. Nyla looked up at him, this man who'd saved her life, and then asked her to risk it again. You're asking me to be bait. I'm asking you to be the weapon that ends this. His hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up. I know what I'm asking. I know it's not fair. But fair doesn't matter anymore. Only survival does. And right now, you're the only one who can get close enough to Victor to destroy him. His thumb brushed across her cheek, a gesture that might have been comfort or just habit. Nyla wanted to pull away, wanted to tell him to find another solution, wanted to run so far from this war that she'd never have to choose between monsters again. But she'd stopped running the night she'd sat beside him in that restaurant. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Lucien's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, maybe, or confirmation that she understood she might not survive this. If anything goes wrong, I know. Nyla's hand covered his against her face. I know the risks. I know you might not be able to save me. I know this might be the last choice I ever make. Her voice steadied. But I'd rather die fighting than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Something flickered across Lucien's face. Respect, maybe. Or just recognition that she'd finally become the thing he'd been training her to be. Dangerous. The meeting with Catherine happened in a different cafe, this one in Gangnam's business district. Expensive. Corporate. The kind of place where illicit conversations disappeared into background noise. Nyla arrived alone, her security detail parked 2 blocks away per Catherine's instructions. She wore business casual, slacks, a silk blouse, minimal makeup. The wire Mika had given her was sewn into her bra, nearly invisible, transmitting everything to a van where Lucien's team monitored in real time. Catherine was already seated, looking polished and professional, like they were meeting to discuss investments instead of murder. You came, Catherine said as Nyla sat down. I wasn't sure you would. I came because you were right. Nyla kept her voice low, urgent, the sound of someone who'd spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with impossible choices. About Lucien, about what he's capable of, about what happens when I'm no longer useful to him. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You found something. Nyla pulled a folder from her bag. The fabricated evidence Seraphine and Mika had spent all morning perfecting. Financial records, shipping manifests, communications logs that tie Lucien directly to 3 murders, including a Japanese diplomat who was getting too close to his operations. She slid it across the table. Everything you need to prove he's running a criminal empire disguised as legitimate business. Catherine opened the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the documents. Nyla watched her face, looking for signs that Catherine suspected the trap. But all she saw was hunger, vindication, the desperate need to believe that her sister's death would finally be avenged. This is... Catherine looked up, her eyes wet. This is exactly what we need. Victor can use this to destroy him, Nyla finished. I know. That's the point. Catherine reached across the table, gripping Nyla's hand. You're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know you probably think you're betraying someone who protected you, but Lucien Kade is a monster. And monsters don't change. They just find new victims. Nyla forced herself to meet Catherine's eyes, to let the lie live in her expression. When does Victor want to meet me? Tonight. Catherine's grip tightened. He has a private facility in Incheon. Shipping warehouse he uses for legitimate business during the day, but after dark, she didn't finish. Didn't need to. Everyone knew what happened in places like that after the sun went down. And if I go there, Nyla said slowly, what guarantee do I have that Victor won't just kill me? Take the information and eliminate the witness? You have my word. Catherine's voice was fervent, desperate. I know what it's like to lose a sister. I won't let him hurt you. You'll be under my protection. And once Lucien's arrested, once Victor has what he needs, you'll get immunity, a new identity, freedom. The promises sounded so sincere, so genuine. If Nyla hadn't watched the video of Victor murdering Elise, she might have even believed them. What time? Nyla asked. Midnight. Come alone. Victor's paranoid about surveillance. If he even suspects you're being tracked. Catherine's meaning was clear. Nyla nodded, stood, left the cafe without looking back. In the van 2 blocks away, Lucien's face was carved from ice as he listened to the recording. She bought it, Mika confirmed, pulling up GPS coordinates on her screen. The warehouse in Incheon. I'm looking at the building layout now. 3 exits, minimal windows, security cameras on every corner. It's a kill box, Ronan said grimly. Victor's going to lock her inside and make sure she never walks out, which is why we'll be there first. Lucien's voice was cold, controlled, but Nyla could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed once against his knees. Seraphine, I need police contacts in Incheon, ones we can trust to look the other way for exactly 30 minutes. Mika, shut down every security camera in a 6-block radius. I want us invisible. Ronan, assemble a team, 10 men, armed. We go in fast and we don't leave witnesses. What about immigration? Seraphine asked. They're still investigating your marriage. If you start a war in Incheon tonight, then we make sure there's no evidence connecting us to it. Lucien's eyes were flat, empty. The face of a man who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Victor wants to meet my wife? Fine. Let's give him exactly what he wants. The next 11 hours were preparation and silence. Nyla trained with Ronan one last time, running through scenarios where everything went wrong. How to break a restraint, how to survive interrogation, how to kill someone with improvised weapons if it came down to that. You don't have to do this, Ronan said as she practiced dislocating her thumb to slip handcuffs. His voice was gruff, almost gentle. Lucien would understand if you backed out. No, he wouldn't. Nyla reset her thumb with a sharp crack, ignoring the pain. And neither would I. Victor's not going to stop. Catherine's not going to stop. This ends tonight, or it never ends. Ronan studied her for a long moment. You've changed. When you first showed up here, you were just a scared teacher playing dress-up. Now, he shook his head. Now you're something else. I'm still scared, Nyla admitted. I'm just better at hiding it. At 11 p.m., Nyla dressed in dark clothes that wouldn't restrict movement. Jeans, fitted black shirt, running shoes. The wire was sewn into her clothing in 3 separate locations. Backup, in case Victor searched her and found one. Mika had also given her a tracker the size of a grain of rice, injected under the skin behind her ear. If anything goes wrong, Mika said, her usual humor completely gone, if Victor makes you as a plant, we'll know. We'll come in. Just stay alive long enough for us to reach you. How long is that? Nyla asked. 3 minutes. Mika's expression was grim. Maybe 4 if you're lucky. 3 minutes. Nyla could survive 3 minutes. She'd survived worse. Lucien waited by the elevator, watching her approach. He'd changed too. Tactical gear, weapons strapped to his body with professional efficiency. This was the man who'd built an empire on violence. The one Catherine thought was a monster. The one Nyla had almost believed was planning her murder. Last chance to back out, Lucien said quietly. Nyla stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough to see the war happening behind his eyes, the calculation fighting against something that looked almost like fear. I'm not backing out, she said. If he hurts you, Lucien's jaw tightened. If anything happens before we can get to you, then you destroy him anyway. Nyla reached up, her hand cupping his scarred jaw in a gesture that mirrored the one he'd used on her so many times. And you don't blame yourself. This was my choice. My decision. Whatever happens next is on me, not you. Lucien's hand covered hers against his face. For just a second, the cold mask slipped. She saw the man underneath, the one who'd loved a woman enough to let her go, the one who'd spent 6 years believing her death was his fault, the one who was terrified of losing someone again, but too damaged to admit it. "Come back," he said roughly. "Whatever it takes. Come back." Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not tentative, hard and desperate and raw. Like he was trying to brand the memory of her into his skin before she disappeared. Nyla kissed him back with equal desperation, tasting violence and fear, and something neither of them had words for. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien's forehead rested against hers. 3 minutes, he said. That's how long you have to survive. Can you do that? I've survived worse, Nyla said. No, you haven't. Lucien's hand tangled in her hair. But you will tonight. And then this ends. All of it. Victor, Catherine. The threats. The fear. It all ends tonight. He released her and stepped back. The mask slammed down again, cold, professional, deadly. Ronan, status? He said into his calm. Team's in position, Ronan's voice crackled back. We're a quarter mile from the warehouse, waiting for your signal. Mika? Cameras are looped, police are on standby. You've got your 30-minute window. Mika's voice was tight. Don't waste it. Lucien looked at Nyla one last time. Go. And remember, you're not a victim anymore. You're a weapon. Act like it. Nyla nodded, walked into the elevator, descended 40 floors to the underground garage where a car waited to take her into the lion's den, and tried not to think about how this might be the last time she saw any of them alive. The warehouse in Incheon looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted metal siding, broken windows. The kind of place that screamed danger to anyone with survival instincts. Nyla's driver, one of Lucien's men she didn't recognize, dropped her 3 blocks away per Victor's instructions. You sure about this? The driver asked as she got out. No, Nyla said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. She walked the 3 blocks alone, her footsteps echoing off concrete and empty streets. The warehouse district was deserted this time of night, just shipping containers and industrial machinery and shadows that moved wrong in her peripheral vision. The warehouse entrance was a rusted door covered in graffiti. Nyla knocked twice. The door opened immediately. A man built like a tank gestured her inside without speaking. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Vast open space, concrete floor stained with things she didn't want to identify, industrial lights that flickered and hummed overhead. And in the center, a makeshift office built from shipping containers. Catherine stood beside it, her polished exterior looking wrong in this space, like expensive jewelry worn to a funeral. You came, Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. I wasn't sure. Where's Victor? Nyla interrupted. Her voice was steady, cold, the sound of someone who'd made their choice and wouldn't be swayed. Catherine gestured toward the office. Waiting. He wants to verify the information personally. Make sure you're legitimate. And if I'm not? Nyla asked. Catherine's smile was sad. Then I'm sorry for what happens next. The office door opened. Victor Zhao stepped out, looking exactly like he had in that club. Expensive suit, cold smile, the confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight because he'd rigged every game in his favor. Nyla Mercer, he said pleasantly. Or should I say Mrs. Kade? Hard to keep track of your identities. Kade was always temporary, Nyla said, forcing herself to walk toward him, to enter the kill box willingly. A survival tactic, nothing more. Really? Victor's eyes swept over her with clinical assessment. Because the way Lucien looked at you in that club didn't seem temporary. It seemed, he smiled, personal. Almost like he'd made the same mistake twice, falling for someone who could destroy him. Nyla kept her expression neutral. Lucien doesn't fall. He calculates. And right now, I'm calculating that helping you is safer than staying with him. Show me what you brought, Victor said. Nyla handed over the folder. Victor flipped through it slowly, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Catherine watched with barely contained hope. Around them, at least 6 armed men positioned themselves at strategic intervals. Exits blocked, escape routes covered, every detail confirming what Ronan had said. This was a kill box. "This is good," Victor said finally. "Very good. Financial records that could destroy half of Lucien's legitimate business. Shipping manifests that prove he's running illegal cargo. Communication logs that tie him directly to murders." He looked up. "Almost too good. Like someone with intimate knowledge of law enforcement procedures helped compile it." Nyla's heart rate spiked. She forced her breathing to stay even. "I'm a linguistics teacher. I know how to research, how to find information, how to make it look convincing." "You're also Lucien Kade's wife," Victor countered. "Legally bound to him, protected by him, trained by him, if rumors are true. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about your sudden change of heart." "My survival instinct isn't a change of heart," Nyla said. "It's self-preservation. You said it yourself, Lucien makes mistakes with women. Elise tried to destroy him, ended up dead. I'm not interested in becoming the second ex-wife who mysteriously disappears." Victor's smile widened. "Interesting that you mention Elise. Did Lucien tell you about her? About how she died?" "He told me she killed herself," Nyla said. "But Catherine showed me proof that he had her murdered, cut her brake lines, sent her off a cliff, all to protect his empire. Is that what Catherine told you?" Victor glanced at Catherine, something unreadable passing between them. "And you believed her?" "I believed the evidence," Nyla said carefully. Victor laughed. Actually laughed, the sound cold and sharp in the warehouse's acoustics. "The evidence Catherine fabricated, the forensic reports she doctored, the witness testimony she invented." He walked toward Catherine slowly. "You really thought I wouldn't check your work? That I wouldn't verify every detail before trusting someone who's been obsessed with revenge for 6 years?" Catherine went pale. "What are you—" "You've been useful," Victor continued, his voice conversational. "Feeding me information about Lucien's operations, helping me identify weaknesses. But did you really think I didn't know about your fabricated evidence? About the lies you've been telling anyone who'd listen about your sister's death?" "I didn't lie," Catherine said, her voice rising. "You killed her. You murdered Elise and framed Lucien." "I killed her because she was going to destroy both our organizations," Victor interrupted. "Lucien's empire and mine. We were partners back then, shared interests, shared enemies. When Elise threatened to expose everything, I removed the threat. Lucien never knew, never suspected. Until—" he looked at Nyla. "Until someone gave him evidence proving otherwise." The pieces clicked together in Nyla's mind with horrifying clarity. "You wanted him to know," she said slowly. "You let Lucien find out you killed Elise. That's why you've been attacking his business, why you've been pushing him toward war. You need him emotional, reckless, making mistakes." "Very good." Victor's smile was genuinely pleased. "Most people don't see the long game. They focus on territory and money and immediate power. But I've been planning this for 3 years. Building evidence, destroying Lucien's alliances, poisoning his relationships. All so that when I finally move against him, he'll be isolated, vulnerable, desperate enough to make the kind of mistake that gets him killed." "And I'm the mistake," Nyla said. "You're the bait." Victor pulled out a gun, the movement casual, easy. "Lucien thinks he's rescuing you tonight, thinks his team is positioned around this warehouse, ready to burst in heroically. But what he doesn't know—" He gestured, and the warehouse lights suddenly blazed to full brightness, revealing dozens of armed men positioned in the rafters behind containers in every shadow. "Is that I've been expecting him, planning for him, preparing for exactly this moment." Nyla's blood turned to ice. The wire transmitted everything to Lucien. He'd heard all of this, which meant he knew it was a trap, which meant— "He's not coming," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "Lucien's not stupid enough to walk into an ambush." "No," Victor agreed, "but he's stupid enough to try saving you anyway. Love makes people reckless, makes them ignore strategy in favor of sentiment. And right now, Lucien Kade is crashing through my defenses, trying to reach you before I put a bullet in your brain." As if summoned by his words, gunfire erupted outside the warehouse. The sound was deafening, automatic weapons, shotguns, the violent percussion of a war starting. Victor's men moved with military precision, taking positions, returning fire. And through it all, Nyla could hear Ronan's voice screaming tactical updates through the comm she knew Lucien was wearing. 50 men, not 10. It's a goddamn army. Boss, pull back. It's a trap. But Lucien's voice came back calm, cold, final. Get to Nyla, whatever it costs. Get to her. Victor grabbed Nyla's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. Let's see how much you're really worth, he said, dragging her toward the office. Nyla moved on instinct. Everything Ronan had taught her, everything she'd learned. She twisted, using Victor's grip against him, her elbow slamming into his throat. Not hard enough to kill, just hard enough to make him release her. She ran, 3 steps before one of Victor's men caught her. She used his momentum to throw him off balance, her knee finding his groin with brutal precision. He dropped. She grabbed his gun, turned, fired twice at the next man rushing toward her. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. She'd never shot anyone before, never even held a real gun until tonight. But training had taught her body what to do even when her brain froze. And right now, her body was fighting to survive. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Lucien's team breached the main entrance in a storm of violence. Nyla saw Ronan first, his massive frame absorbing bullets that would have killed smaller men, his shotgun turning Victor's men into red mist. Then Seraphine, impossibly, moving through the firefight with surgical precision, every shot dropping a target. Mika somewhere in the rafters with a rifle, her usual humor replaced by cold efficiency. And Lucien. He moved like death incarnate. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just cold, brutal efficiency that left bodies in his wake. His eyes scanned the warehouse, searching, until they locked on Nyla. Their gazes met across the battlefield, and despite the bullets, despite the blood, despite everything, he smiled. Then Victor's hand closed around Nyla's throat from behind. "Drop your weapons," Victor's voice cut through the gunfire. "All of you, or I snap her neck right now." The warehouse went silent except for the sound of bodies hitting the floor and someone screaming in pain. Lucien stood 30 feet away, his gun still raised, pointed directly at Victor's head. But the shot was impossible. Victor had positioned himself perfectly, using Nyla's body as a shield. "Let her go," Lucien said, his voice utterly calm despite the fury burning in his eyes. "Why would I do that?" Victor's grip tightened on Nyla's throat. She could feel his breath against her ear, feel the gun pressed against her temple. "She's the only leverage I have left, the only thing keeping you from killing me where I stand." "You're wrong." Lucien took a step forward. "The only thing keeping you alive is that I want you to understand something before you die. You want to know what the difference is between you and me, Victor? Between monsters and killers?" "Enlighten me," Victor said. "Monsters think they're untouchable. Think violence and fear make them powerful. Think love is weakness." Lucien took another step. "But killers understand that love is what makes us dangerous, that having something worth protecting makes us willing to burn the entire world down." His eyes never left Nyla's. "So go ahead. Pull that trigger, kill the woman I love, and find out exactly how much worse things can get when you take away the only thing that made me human." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Lucien had said it out loud, admitted it in front of everyone, made himself vulnerable in the one way Victor had thought impossible. And in that moment of surprise, Nyla made her choice. She grabbed Victor's gun hand with both of hers, shoved it away from her head, felt rather than heard the shot that fired inches from her face. Then she dropped her full weight, using gravity and Victor's grip against him, and drove her elbow backward into his ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. Victor's hold loosened for just a second. It was enough. Lucien's shot took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Nyla dove away, rolling across concrete that tore her clothes and skin. More gunfire erupted as Victor's remaining men realized their boss was down. But Lucien was already there, standing over Victor like an avenging angel carved from ice and fury. "You killed Elise," Lucien said quietly. "You let me believe for 6 years that I'd driven her to suicide. You used her death as a weapon against me. And then you came after Nyla." He pressed his gun against Victor's forehead. "That was your mistake, taking the one thing I couldn't afford to lose. So kill me." Victor spat, blood bubbling from his lips. "Prove you're exactly the monster everyone says you are." Lucien's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped. He looked at Nyla, still sprawled on the floor, bleeding and breathing hard, but alive. So impossibly alive. And he lowered the gun. "No," Lucien said. "I'm not giving you that mercy. You're going to live. And you're going to testify. Every crime, every murder, every deal. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell knowing that you lost." He turned to Seraphine. "Call our police contacts. Have them bring prosecutors, real ones, not paid assets. People who actually care about putting monsters away." "You're insane," Victor rasped. "You think testifying protects you? The moment they arrest me, I take you down with me. Your whole empire, everyone you've protected." "Good," Lucien said. "Let it burn. Let all of it burn, as long as she walks away." He crossed the warehouse in 3 strides and pulled Nyla to her feet. His hands framed her face, checking for injuries, his eyes wild with something between relief and terror. "You're alive," he said roughly. "I heard what you said," Nyla interrupted. "About love, about burning the world down." "I meant it." Lucien's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Every word. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what I have to sacrifice. You're the only thing that matters." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Catherine appeared from behind a shipping container, her expensive clothes torn and bloody. She looked at Victor, at Lucien, at Nyla, and something in her expression crumbled. "He really did kill her," she whispered. "My sister. Victor murdered Elise, and I helped him. I helped my sister's killer because I was so desperate for revenge I couldn't see the truth." "Yeah," Nyla said quietly. "You did. But you can make it right now. Testify. Tell the prosecutors everything Victor made you do, everything he's guilty of. Help us end this." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. The police arrived in a flood of uniforms and flashing lights. Prosecutors Seraphine had called. Federal investigators who'd been building cases against Victor for years. They took him into custody with professional efficiency, reading rights that Victor spat curses through. And Lucien stood with Nyla in the middle of the carnage, both of them covered in blood and gunpowder residue, both of them alive against all odds. "What happens now?" Nyla asked. "Now," Lucien said, pulling her against his chest. "We figure out what comes after survival." "Now," Lucien said, pulling her against his chest. "We figure out what comes after survival." But survival, Nyla was learning, never came clean. The warehouse in Incheon became a crime scene that dominated headlines for 3 weeks. 27 bodies. Federal investigations that reached into government offices, police precincts, and corporate boardrooms across Seoul. Victor Zhao's empire collapsed in spectacular fashion as prosecutors used Catherine's testimony to unravel decades of trafficking, money laundering, and murder. And through it all, Lucien Kade stood in the center of the storm, making calculated decisions about which secrets to reveal and which to bury. Nyla watched him from the penthouse windows, seeing how the war had changed him, or maybe just stripped away the layers he'd used to hide what he'd always been. He spent 18-hour days with lawyers and investigators, walking a razor's edge between cooperation and self-incrimination, giving them enough to destroy Victor without exposing his own organization to fatal scrutiny. It was a performance, another role, another survival tactic. But at night, when the lawyers left and the prosecutors went home and the penthouse fell silent, Lucien would come to her room. He never asked permission, never knocked, just appeared in her doorway like a ghost who'd forgotten how to haunt anywhere else. They didn't talk much those first nights, just existed in the same space. His presence a reminder that they'd both survived when the odds said they shouldn't have. Her presence a reminder that survival meant something different now than it had 4 weeks ago. On the 10th night after the warehouse, Nyla finally spoke. "Victor's lawyers are claiming self-defense," she said from her position by the window. "Saying you attacked him unprovoked, that the warehouse was legitimate business and you started a war over a personal vendetta." Lucien sat on the edge of her bed, his shirt unbuttoned, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Let them claim whatever they want. Catherine's testimony contradicts everything. And the evidence we recovered from Victor's files," he rubbed his eyes. "His own documentation proves he orchestrated Elise's murder. That's first degree. That alone gets him life without parole." "What about your organization?" Nyla asked quietly. "The shipping routes, the gray market operations. How long before prosecutors decide you're worth investigating too?" "I've been restructuring," Lucien said. "Selling off anything remotely illegal. converting dirty money into clean investments. By the time they finish with Victor, my empire will look boring, legitimate, just another international businessman with slightly questionable past associates. Can you do that? Nyla turned to face him. Just walk away from what you've built? Become someone else? Lucien's eyes found hers across the room. I did it once before, after Elise died. Rebuilt myself into something harder, colder, more dangerous. So yeah, I can do it again. Question is whether I want to. And do you? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. That world. He gestured vaguely at the windows, at Seoul's glittering skyline, at the empire that existed in shadows beneath the city's lights. It's all I've known for 15 years. It's how I survived after my father was killed, how I protected the people who depend on me, how I made sense of a world that's fundamentally senseless. He stood, moving toward her slowly. But then you crashed into that restaurant. And suddenly survival wasn't enough anymore. Suddenly I wanted something more. Something that didn't involve counting bodies at the end of every week. Nyla's breath caught as he stopped in front of her. Close enough to touch. Close enough to see the cracks in his armor that had never fully healed. What did you want? She whispered. Peace. The word came out rough, like admitting it cost him something vital. I wanted to stop fighting. Stop calculating. Stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the next war. I wanted... His hand reached up, cupping her jaw in that gesture that had become familiar. To wake up next to someone who knew exactly what I was and chose to stay anyway. Nyla's eyes burned. I'm still here. For now. Lucien's thumb traced her cheekbone. But we both know that contract expired 3 weeks ago. 6 months. That was the deal. And you've paid your dues, survived the impossible, earned your freedom. His hand dropped away. So the question isn't what I want anymore. It's what you want, whether this, he gestured between them, was ever real or just two people surviving by pretending. The question hung in the air like smoke. Nyla thought about the woman who'd crashed into that restaurant 5 weeks ago, desperate, terrified, willing to lie to a room full of criminals just to survive one more night. That woman would have taken the freedom Lucien offered and run as far as money could carry her. But that woman had died somewhere in the past 5 weeks, replaced by someone harder. Someone who'd learned to throw a punch, fire a gun, stare down monsters without flinching. Someone who'd chosen to walk into Victor's warehouse knowing she might not walk out. Someone who'd fallen in love with the most dangerous man in Seoul and couldn't figure out how to stop. I think... Nyla's voice cracked. She forced herself to continue. I think it started as pretending, a performance we were both good at. But somewhere between the training and the lies and the wars, she met his eyes. It became real for me. You became real for me. And I don't know how to walk away from that. Lucien stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten how to understand. You should, he said quietly, walk away. I'm not... He stopped, started again. I've killed people, Nyla. Ordered executions. Built an empire on violence and fear. The prosecutors are being careful now because destroying Victor is more important than investigating me. But that protection won't last forever. Eventually, someone's going to look too closely at my past and find things that can't be explained away. His hands clenched at his sides. And when that happens, anyone close to me becomes collateral damage. So you're protecting me, Nyla said, by pushing me away. I'm giving you a choice. Lucien's voice stayed level. Something I never gave Elise. She loved me despite what I was. Tried to change me. When she realized she couldn't, she tried to destroy me instead. And that choice killed her. Pain flickered across his face. I won't make that mistake again. I won't trap someone in my world and watch them slowly suffocate. Nyla moved closer. Close enough that her body pressed against his. Close enough to feel his heartbeat thundering beneath his skin. What if I choose to stay? She asked. Not because I'm trapped, not because I owe you, but because somewhere in the past 5 weeks I stopped seeing you as a monster and started seeing you as... She searched for the right word. As someone worth loving despite everything you've done. Lucien's hands found her waist, gripping hard enough to hurt. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Nyla's fingers traced the scar along his jaw. I'm saying that I've seen the worst parts of you. The violence, the cold calculation, the willingness to burn the world down. And I'm still here, still choosing this, still choosing you. Why? The question came out broken, desperate, like he genuinely couldn't understand. Because you did the same for me, Nyla said simply. You saw me at my most desperate and gave me a chance to survive instead of just using me. You trained me to fight instead of keeping me helpless. You protected me even when it would have been easier to sacrifice me. Her voice steadied. You loved me before you admitted it to yourself. And I'm not walking away from that. Not for safety, not for freedom, not for anything. Lucien kissed her like a man drowning, desperate and fierce and raw. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressing hers against the window, Seoul's lights glittering behind them like scattered stars. Nyla kissed him back with equal desperation, tasting violence and vulnerability and the kind of future they'd both thought was impossible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien's forehead rested against hers. If you stay, he said roughly, I can't promise safety, can't promise normal, can't promise anything except that I will fight like hell to keep you alive and beside me for as long as you'll let me. That's all I'm asking for, Nyla whispered. They made love that night with the desperation of people who'd survived death together, slow and fierce and achingly tender, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's scars, finding peace in the spaces between breaths. And when dawn came gray and cold through the windows, Nyla woke wrapped in Lucien's arms, feeling safer than she had in months. The trial started 6 weeks after the warehouse. Victor Zhao sat in a courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit that looked obscene against his polished exterior. His lawyers fought hard, but Catherine's testimony was damning. And when prosecutors presented the evidence recovered from Victor's files, including the recording of him admitting to Elise's murder, the defense collapsed. Nyla testified on day 3. Walked through her father's debts, Victor's threats, the contract that had tried to turn her into property. She kept her voice steady and her answers precise, refusing to break under cross-examination that tried to paint her as a willing accomplice. Lucien sat in the gallery behind her. She could feel his presence like an anchor, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore, that survival had become something shared instead of solitary. The verdict came after 4 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder for Elise, trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy. The judge sentenced Victor to life without possibility of parole, and the courtroom erupted in a chaos of reporters and cameras and people desperate for statements. But Nyla only saw Lucien pushing through the crowd toward her, his hand finding hers and holding tight. It's over, he said quietly. Is it? Nyla asked. Lucien's smile was tired. This part is. The rest... He shrugged. We'll figure it out as we go. Catherine approached them before they could leave. She looked smaller than she had in that cafe, diminished, like testifying had burned away everything except grief and regret. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible over the courtroom noise. For everything. For lying to you. For helping Victor. For... Her voice cracked. For betraying my sister's memory by working with her killer. Nyla studied her. This woman who'd been consumed by revenge for 6 years, who'd made herself into a weapon aimed at the wrong target, who'd almost gotten Nyla killed because she couldn't see past her own pain. Elise would want you to move on, Nyla said finally, to let the grief go, to find something worth living for besides revenge. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how. Neither did I. Nyla squeezed Lucien's hand. But you figure it out. One day at a time, one choice at a time. You survive until surviving becomes living again. Catherine nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The media circus lasted another 3 weeks. Every news outlet wanted interviews. Every tabloid ran speculation about Nyla and Lucien's relationship. Immigration finally closed their investigation, satisfied that the marriage was legitimate. Prosecutors decided that building a case against Lucien wasn't worth the resources when Victor's conviction had already achieved their goals. And slowly, impossibly, life started resembling normal. Lucien sold off the last of his illegal operations and reinvested everything into legitimate shipping contracts. Seraphine transitioned into corporate strategy, her political connections suddenly valuable in boardrooms instead of criminal networks. Ronan took over security for Lucien's now legal enterprises, his violence channeled into protection instead of intimidation. Mika disappeared for 2 weeks and came back with a job offer from a tech company that paid obscene money and didn't ask questions about her past. The penthouse felt different without the constant threat of violence. Quieter, emptier. Like they were all learning how to exist without war as background noise. One morning, 3 months after Victor's sentencing, Nyla woke to find Lucien standing by the windows, staring out at Seoul's skyline with an expression she couldn't read. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "How different everything looks when you're not waiting for it to kill you," Lucien said quietly. "I've lived in this city for 20 years, built an empire here, survived wars that should have ended me, but I never actually saw it. Not really. Not until now." Nyla followed his gaze. The city spread out below them in morning light. Gray buildings and green parks, and the Han River cutting through everything like a silver vein. Beautiful in a harsh way. Unforgiving but honest. "Your father's debt," Lucien said suddenly. "I never paid it. After everything with Victor, I forgot to—" "He doesn't deserve payment," Nyla interrupted. "He sold me. Signed a contract treating me like property. The fact that Victor was worse doesn't make what my father did acceptable." "Have you talked to him?" Lucien asked. "Since that night?" "No." Nyla's hands clenched on the window ledge. "He called once, 2 weeks after the warehouse. Wanted to know if I could help him now that I was married to someone wealthy. I hung up." She paused. "He'll probably contact me again eventually. Men like him always do, but I'm not interested in forgiveness. Some betrayals are permanent." Lucien's hand covered hers on the ledge. "What about your mother?" "She's doing better." A small smile crossed Nyla's face. "The hospital bills were handled. She doesn't know who paid them. Thinks it was some charitable foundation. I visit her twice a week. She asks about my husband, and I tell her enough truth mixed with lies that she stays happy." Nyla turned to face him. "She wants to meet you. Officially, not at a hospital. A real dinner, family dinner." Something flickered across Lucien's face. "Family. Too fast?" Nyla asked. "No." Lucien pulled her against his chest. "Just unexpected. I haven't had family in a long time. Didn't think I'd ever want it again." His hand stroked through her hair. "But yeah, dinner with your mother. I can do that." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, watching Seoul wake up beneath them. The dinner happened 2 weeks later at a small restaurant Nyla's mother had chosen. Nothing fancy. Just good food and quiet atmosphere. Nyla's mother arrived early, dressed carefully, nervous energy radiating off her in waves. "He's really coming?" she asked Nyla for the 3rd time. "He's really coming, Mom," Nyla assured her. "And he's—" Her mother hesitated. "He's good to you? Treats you well?" Nyla thought about everything they'd survived together. The violence and fear and desperate choices. The way Lucien had turned her panic into opportunity, then slowly, impossibly, into love. The way he'd been willing to destroy his own empire rather than lose her. "He's everything I need," Nyla said honestly. Lucien arrived exactly on time, wearing a suit that looked casual, but probably cost more than the restaurant's monthly income. He'd left the bodyguards outside per Nyla's request. This was supposed to be family dinner, not a security detail. He shook Nyla's mother's hand with genuine warmth, spoke to her in Korean with careful respect, answered her questions about his business with practiced vagueness that sounded honest, and throughout the meal his hand found Nyla's under the table, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that had become automatic. "You're different than I expected," Nyla's mother said halfway through dinner, addressing Lucien directly. "The news made you sound—" She stopped. "Well, you know what they said." "That I'm a criminal," Lucien supplied calmly. "That I've built my fortune on questionable business practices. That your daughter married someone dangerous." Nyla's mother flinched. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine." Lucien's voice stayed gentle. "Some of what they said is true. I've made choices most people wouldn't approve of. Done things I can't take back. But I can promise you this. I will protect your daughter with everything I have. She will never want for safety, security, or someone willing to fight for her." His eyes met Nyla's across the table. "She saved my life in ways that have nothing to do with bullets or blood. So yeah, I'm dangerous. But never to her. Never to the people she loves." Nyla's mother studied him for a long moment, then smiled. That's all a mother can ask for, really. Someone who sees how precious her daughter is. The dinner ended with promises to do this again soon. Nyla's mother hugged her goodbye with tears in her eyes, whispering that she approved, that Lucien seemed like a good man despite his reputation, that Nyla looked happier than she had in years. In the car afterward, Lucien was quiet. "You okay?" Nyla asked. "I just realized something," he said slowly. "That was the first time in 6 years I've sat down for a normal dinner. No weapons, no bodyguards scanning for threats, no business deals disguised as small talk, just," he shook his head, "just family. Normal. I'd forgotten what that felt like." Nyla squeezed his hand. "You could have it again. If you wanted. We could build something normal together. Or at least our version of normal." "What does that look like?" Lucien asked. "Our version? I don't know." Nyla smiled. "But I think we figure it out the same way we figured out everything else. One impossible choice at a time." 6 months after Victor's trial, Nyla stood in front of a university building in Seoul's academic district. The building was new, modern glass and steel, and above the entrance, carved into stone, was her name. The Nyla Kade Center for Linguistics and Translation Studies. Lucien had bought this building without telling her, renovated it, staffed it with professors and resources, created an entire institution dedicated to the subject she loved, and then handed her the deed one quiet morning over coffee, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You gave up your teaching career," he'd said when she'd stared at the paperwork in shock. "Lost your job and your apartment and your normal life because of me. This doesn't make up for that. But maybe it's a start." Now Nyla walked through the halls of the center, watching students cluster around conversation tables, professors leading seminars, resources that would have seemed impossible when she'd been teaching English in a cramped classroom for poverty wages. Lucien appeared beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think you're trying to buy redemption," Nyla said, but she was smiling. "Is it working? Maybe." She turned to face him. "You know I don't need grand gestures, right? I didn't fall in love with your money or your power. I fell in love with you, the person underneath all the armor." "I know." Lucien pulled her closer. "But that person wants to give you things, wants to see you build something that's entirely yours, wants to watch you create instead of just survive." Nyla kissed him there in the hallway, surrounded by students and professors who diplomatically pretended not to notice. When they broke apart, both smiling, she realized something fundamental had shifted. They weren't surviving anymore. They were living. A year after that night in the restaurant, Nyla woke to find Lucien already awake, watching her with an expression she'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something important and didn't know how. "What?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Marry me," Lucien said. "Again, but for real this time. Not a contract, not a performance, not a survival tactic, just," he paused, "just two people who want to build a life together, who've survived the worst and decided the future is worth fighting for." Nyla's breath caught. "We're already married, legally. The paperwork's been real for over a year." "The paperwork's real," Lucien agreed, "but we never had a choice. Not really. You crashed into my world because you were desperate. I kept you because you were useful. Everything that came after," he cupped her face. "I want you to have the choice now, to decide without guns to your head or monsters chasing you, to choose this, choose us, choose forever." Tears burned Nyla's eyes. "You're asking if I want to stay." "I'm asking if you want to stay because you love me," Lucien said quietly. "Not because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. Not because it's convenient or safe or makes logical sense. Just because somewhere in the past year, I became home." Nyla thought about the woman who'd crashed into that restaurant 18 months ago. How that woman would have laughed at the idea that she'd end up here, in love with a reformed crime lord, running an academic center, building a life that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choice. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll marry you. Again. For real this time. Because you became home." They married in a small ceremony overlooking the Han River. No media, no spectacle. Just Seraphine and Ronan and Mika and Nyla's mother and a handful of people who'd survived the war alongside them. A justice of the peace who didn't ask questions. Vows that were simple and honest and carried the weight of everything they'd survived. When Lucien kissed her as his wife, truly his wife, chosen not claimed, Nyla tasted freedom and future and the kind of peace she'd thought was impossible. The reception was quiet. Champagne and conversation and laughter that wasn't performance. Ronan made a toast about how Nyla had survived his training, which made her the toughest person he'd ever met. Seraphine admitted, with what might have been the first genuine smile Nyla had ever seen from her, that she'd been wrong about Nyla being a liability. Mika presented them with a gift, a framed photograph from that first night in the restaurant, grainy security footage showing Nyla grabbing Lucien's hand and whispering those desperate words. I hacked into the restaurant servers, Mika explained. Figured you'd want to remember where it started. Even if where it started was completely insane. Nyla stared at the photograph, at the desperation in her own face, at Lucien's careful neutrality that hid the calculation happening behind his eyes, at the moment that had changed both their lives forever. Thank you, she said quietly. That night, Nyla and Lucien stood on the penthouse balcony, watching Seoul's lights blur into a tapestry of color. The city looked different now, less threatening, more like home. Do you ever regret it? Nyla asked. That night, letting me crash into your world? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. I regret that you had to go through hell to survive. I regret that I couldn't protect you from all of it. I regret that you had to become someone harder, someone scarred, someone who knows what violence tastes like. He turned to face her. But do I regret meeting you, keeping you, falling in love with you? His hand found hers. Never. You're the best impossible thing that ever happened to me. Nyla leaned into him, feeling his arms wrap around her, feeling safe in a way that had nothing to do with bodyguards or bulletproof glass. What happens now? She asked. After the happy ending? This isn't an ending, Lucien said against her hair. It's just the part where we stop running and start building, where we figure out what comes after survival. And what does come after survival? Lucien's arms tightened around her. Whatever we want. A quiet life. A loud one. Children, maybe. Or just each other. Travel. Work. Building something that matters. Creating instead of destroying. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. We've earned the right to find out. So let's stop waiting for the next war and start living like we've already won. Nyla kissed him as Seoul sparkled beneath them, as the future stretched out uncertain and terrifying and absolutely worth fighting for. As two people who'd survived the impossible chose, again and again, to keep surviving together. Because that's what love was, she'd learned. Not the absence of fear or danger or impossible choices. Not safety or certainty or guaranteed happy endings. Love was choosing someone anyway. Choosing them through violence and lies and desperate nights. Choosing them when survival meant sacrifice. Choosing them again in the quiet moments when the war ended and life became about building instead of breaking. Love was Lucien Kade looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Like she'd saved him just as surely as he'd saved her. Like together, they were something neither of them could have been alone. Years would pass. The media would eventually stop caring about the mafia boss who'd gone legitimate and the woman who'd survived his world. Immigration would close their files. Prosecutors would move on to other cases. Seoul would spin forward, indifferent to the small wars fought in glass towers above the city. But on this night, standing on a balcony 40 floors above the Han River, Nyla Kade held her husband's hand and understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about winning or losing, wasn't about becoming stronger or harder or more dangerous. It was about finding someone who saw all your scars and loved you anyway. Someone who fought beside you instead of just for you. Someone who turned survival into a shared language instead of a solitary burden. I love you, she said into the Seoul night. I know, Lucien replied, his voice rough with emotion he'd finally learned to show. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice. They stood together as the city breathed beneath them, two survivors who'd become something more. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stop running and choose to stay. The war was over, the future was uncertain, but for the first time in both their lives, that uncertainty felt like freedom instead of fear. And that, Nyla thought, as dawn broke gray and gold over Seoul's skyline, was worth every impossible choice they'd made to get here.